technologically ignorant, and
you're
both of my kids are out, and they're my consultants. So.
All right, we are now live on YouTube, so you're good to go.
Awesome. All right, so welcome to the May 28th, 2020 meeting of Committee Board 6, Business Affairs and Street Activities Committee. My name is Kyle Thalid, and I'm the chair of the committee. The meeting is called to order at 6:32 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by Assistant District Manager Cody Osterman and Community Associate Brendan Burke. So for those who are joining from the public, any members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the question and answer feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we'll field questions from the public. Tonight's minutes are being taken by Kevin O'Keefe. So we'll begin by taking attendance. So go ahead, Cody.
Okay, 1 second, please. All right, we'll start with you, Kyle. Matt Bondi.
Here.
Did Matt join? Dan Devine? Dan. Jeannie D'Onofrio?
Here.
Paige Judge? I see Paige.
Page is muted.
Youssef?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. John Keller?
Here.
Anton Malner?
Here.
Kevin O'Keefe?
Present.
Frank Scala? Frank join?
I got an email saying he couldn't make it.
Okay, I tried to reach him this afternoon and he didn't answer the phone. Seema Shaw
Here.
and Susan Steinberg.
Here.
All right, that's a quorum.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen. If I actually have 2 amendments to make to that based on 2 guests that we have. We have joining us City Council member Keith Powers, who I'd like to move up at the top, as well as from Senator Quillman's office, we have Staffer Sam. So I'd like to move them up to the first 2 to discuss some priorities that they have that we will be discussing in further detail through the agenda. So if there's no objection to that agenda as amended, please let me know. If you object to the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. I'm not seeing anything.
No objections.
Perfect. So seeing no objections, the agenda for tonight's meeting is adopted. The minutes from the February 27th meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt these minutes. So committee members, if you object to adopting the minutes, please raise your hand through Zoom. All right. So seeing no objections, the minutes from the February 27, 2020 meeting are adopted and will soon be available on the CB6 website. So before we begin our discussion, I'd like to set some ground rules for the committee as well as to our members of the public. So first, no one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question or a comment about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through the raise your hand feature of Zoom. It's in the participants section. So just click on the participants icon and there should be raise your hand feature there. If you still have some kind of technical difficulty, please use the chat function and we'll figure out from there. Now with that, for members of the public and for the committee, the chat function should not be used for committee business or for questions about agenda topics. any remarks that you would like to make, no matter how small or big, must be made through the presentation. So please raise your hand through Zoom, and we will unmute you so you can make your remarks. The chat should only be used to alert to us about any technical difficulties that you have, or to state writing in information like an email address, for example, that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. So next, when a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you, and you can mute yourself so that you can speak and make remarks. And the reason for all of this, as many of us know, is that we are required by executive order to create a verbatim transcript of the meeting. So with that, please make sure that your questions and comments are succinct and germane to the discussion. Thank you very much. So first up, I'd like to give the floor to City Council Member Keith Powers.
Keith, you're muted.
Unmute, Keith.
I'm sorry. I think by now I would get the hang of this. Nice to see everybody. And thank you, Kyle, and thank you for letting me go a little early. It's former chair privileges. I feel like I get to go at the front of the agenda. But thanks so much. Nice to see everybody, and hope everybody is staying safe and healthy right now. And I want to say thank you to the committee for taking up an important discussion about the future here of our nightlife, our bars and restaurants and cafes here in the city. And I don't know if others feel this way, but for me, New York City is so much of the vibrancy of New York is so much tied to all these places that add character to our specific neighborhoods. And where we live particularly, there are so many good ones that are fighting for their lives right now, and we want to make sure that we can help them. The topic I wanted to talk about was this idea around utilizing open spaces and streets to be able to help out those establishments that are struggling right now. Some have not even opened their doors for takeout and deliveries. Some are fighting to use that as a way to keep afloat right now. But I can assure you, I think you're going to hear from some later, even that version of what they're able to do now is not nearly enough. And even when we get to opening up bars and restaurants and cafes and other needed retail in the future, they're going to have capacity limitations that's going to make it very hard for them to be able to pay the rent. So one thing I've been promoting throughout this period has been looking at underutilized open space right now as an opportunity for many of our neighborhood businesses to be able to do some social, I say safe and social distance business right now. And you're going to hear from some folks, I think some who have ideas around streets in the district that can be used. You're going to hear, I think, from Fred, from our friend Fred Cerullo, about some other ideas. But I just tell you, we've all been talking. We've all been working in concert, looking for ways that we can be helping some of these neighborhood businesses. Today, the City Council introduced legislation that would create a system, a regulatory system, basically, to allow the city to move forward, to look at sidewalks, to look at streets, to look at even the plazas, and potentially even other private or public-private spaces to be able to be utilized to help those businesses out. I just say I am really in fully support of both the larger concept of opening up these spaces which are not really being utilized, particularly in Midtown right now, and also some of the proposals you're going to hear in the district, because the economics of this are really, really difficult right now. I think we have to be doing as much as we can to help folks out. And I have said this, I've said it to commissioners, I've said it to the mayor, I've said it to the speaker, I've said everybody, I would like CB6, I would like my district to be a first priority when we talk about helping out all these businesses. And there are opportunities here. I think you're going to hear some of them tonight. I really would ask CB6 to kind of think about this, think about what are the places where this should be happening, but also think about the regulations and the things that you think are needed here to help. But we just want to make sure we can get this moving and not add months of time to people to be able to take advantage of this. We hopefully will pass legislation in the city council to create this. But right now, what I think is really helpful for the community board is to think about is what are good ideas for making this happen. And I won't take too much time up, but Fred Cerullo has some really good ideas. I don't know if he's going to picture all of them, but there's lots of opportunities when you look at Vanderbilt Avenue, Pershing Square, and other places around Grand 43rd Street, other places that East Midtown rezoning has made into good plazas and good space right now. There's places in the 50s that you're going to hear from. There's lots of opportunities because there's lots of places that need the help right now. And we should look for more down south near Stuyvesant Town where I live. But let's be creative right now. Community Board 6 should be one of those areas that moves early in this. I hope you'll put some some real thought into that, and hopefully we'll pass some legislation as well into that. And I know he's going to talk about it, but I just want to say I also really support Senator Hoylman's bill. It will also provide a lifeline to folks with takeout and delivery extension, and I'm really grateful he's doing that as well. But anyway, I can stop there. I just want to echo the support. Thank you guys for thinking about this. Let's soon try to put some real thought into where this should go. And you guys should be, primary actors in helping figure that out. And Kyle, I'm handing it back to you, but I'm happy to take some questions on any of the above. I don't know if I lost Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you. I see that we have a question or comment from Yusuf.
Yep.
All right, we have a couple. So first, Sandra.
Sandra, do you want to go?
All right, can we unmute Yusuf?
Sorry,
Hey, Yusuf.
Keith, I wonder if there are any specifics or any guidelines for how this is going to move forward? Like any criteria or things that we should be thinking about as we select places within the district?
Sure. So not all the criteria has been laid out, and for our area, I think one of the hardest questions is should we be talking about extending curb space and sidewalk space? So, potentially take away some parking and move into the street space. Should we fully close down a street? Should we look to plazas or really underutilized streets? Like I said Vanderbilt. I'm not nominating Vanderbilt, but just as an idea, as places that make the most sense. And the hardest part too is also who gets to take advantage of it, because the only things I would look at a little bit is opportunity, meaning how to do the most help to people right now. So places where there might be a number of people you can help out. I would encourage looking at extending some of the sidewalk space in our district. That seems to be the easiest way to move. And particularly right now, as we're running into some issues of crowding, potentially take some of that space to allow people to space out as they're doing takeout or delivery. But I also do think we should at least consider closing some streets down in places where it makes sense. I don't think the hardest part is going to be helping every single business, because some reside on a street where they're the only person. Some have, like you're going to hear from, have multiple businesses on the same street that can work together. That's going to be a hard question. But the one thing I'd say is Midtown right now, Midtown really particularly is going to be around Grand Central, those areas is going to be underutilized, I think, until September, when office space maybe starts to come back online. There's some opportunities to do stuff around there that I think will be a good utilization of street space. And the only other thing I think about is, are we okay thinking about, with sidewalk cafes, for instance, you need clearance on the sidewalk. Are we okay giving more of that space over to either retail or dining right now to help them do this? But I do like the idea, to be frank, of closing some of the actual maybe side streets down, or even some lanes on the streets, because if our streets are going to be a little less crowded, this seems like a good use to help these guys get back on their feet. But to your question, I think the central question is sidewalks, plazas, or closed streets, or maybe all of the above. Maybe all of the above, to be honest. But what I think you guys can do right now is flag areas where you think this makes the most sense. And then we can, with your partnership, talk to DOT, Consumer Affairs, and the mayor's office about exactly how to situate that. But let me just add one thing. It would be helpful to maybe even come out of this meeting with the support, or not, with a position, and then also maybe with some ideas, just conceptually, about where this might work. we can then all work together over the next couple of weeks to actually drill down.
Thank you.
We'll get into further detail about that later in the agenda. But let's go to Susan and then Yusuf.
Okay, Keith, under the governor's reopening guidelines, restaurants are phase 3. Is it the hope that if we can come up with a good solid plan for outside dining that we could jump ahead?
I think there's a possibility to go maybe in phase 2 if you, I mean, maybe even earlier. But what right now I would like us to be able to tackle the minimum is being able to talk about as when the weather gets nice, how to make sure that certain places are not going to get super crowded. On the north part of my district in the Upper East Side, we saw some crowding around places. So maybe giving some spaces, a little more space to put like, you know, to do some social distancing and keep people, that should maybe be part of phase 1. I think phase 2 is a good opportunity to do some of this so that they can start some service, or even if it's just putting up like, you know, high tops with, you know, just so people can sort of stretch out a little bit and to let them make a little more revenue, make a little more money. But certainly as we get to phase 3, this has to be part of this, because they're going to, restaurants are going to open at what, 25, 50% capacity. I just concerned that it may not even be worth opening the doors in some cases versus continuing what they're doing right now. So yeah, I've been asked this question a few times. I think we should like get the plan up and running in the next, like a plan in the next few weeks. I think that phase 2, which could be, you know, 3 or 4 weeks away, this should certainly be part of. I know that's even still hard for a lot of folks, but I think waiting till phase 3 could be too long, just to be honest. But what could be, but I will tell you, the biggest challenge right now is like figuring out how to do this everywhere. What might be helpful is to pick a few places where it makes sense, and then we can actually talk to City Hall about what exactly that would entail if we want to do in particular areas to make a draft plan, maybe even a pilot, you know, or something like that. But yeah, I think phase 3 might be too long. It might be 6 weeks or longer from now, and we might be missing an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Let's go to Yusuf, then Jeannie, and then Kevin, and then I'd like to move on to Sam, who has to leave soon.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks to the council member. Just a really quick question for you, Keith. A lot of folks have tried to connect or position the restaurant reopening sort of plans with like transportation accommodations. And so there's been a lot of talk around putting forth one single plan that advances things like, you know, greater bus service, greater bike network, et cetera, with some of the restaurant reopening stuff. So would love to hear whether you're approaching it that way, more holistically, and kind of, you know, it'll probably take longer that way, or from sort of a piecemeal approach, or a little bit of both.
Yeah, look, what we're doing right now is like the open streets is like, you know, it's closing actual space down so people can bike and walk and things like that. And in certain areas, we do have to make sure we're preserving bus service, even on some of those side streets, bus service. I think we do have, like, some of the areas I've already talked to, like I've already been looking at, there are challenges around crosstown bus service and stuff like that. So we're trying to connect all of the things. Look, I always aspire to solve a lot, like the transportation. We're trying to think about the transportation issues alongside of this, and I don't want to cut people off from getting around town or utilizing it. But I mean, if you look at, you know, there's potential on some of these streets to potentially open up some space for, you know, access to get through, whether it's on a bike or walking or even buses, and still preserve part of the space for expanded service. But, you know, if you have specific ideas on that, you should email me them, and I'm happy to take a look at specific areas. And like I said, we haven't even figured out how to do this yet in a real way, so ideas are really welcome.
Great.
Now, Jeannie.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. My question is, phase 1 is coming up at some point. We're down to 4 out of 7. And that's going to already automatically start traffic coming into the city. And once phase 2, which
I think you cut out.
nobody wants to jump on the subway from the outer boroughs to get into Manhattan. So I think there's going to be some traffic issues when you start closing streets. I think there's going to be a lot of competition for that space. So I'm assuming that in this legislation has been some kind of discussion about sharing space, not with just buses and bicycles, but with a lot of cars.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I heard most of it, but I think you cut out for a piece. Look, on 43rd Street, which Fred Cirillo can talk a little bit about, it's right down the block from my office. We have a shared street. Half of it is basically pedestrian space, and the other half is allowed for a through space. We've tried to. That's one street. It's not the whole grid, but we tried to find a way to match them. I'll tell you from some of the folks I've heard in the city, it's particularly in my area around Midtown, is it feels like office space is not going to come on in a real way until post summer. So we are going to have to find, we will always have to find the balance, and this is going to be where the PD and Department of Transportation come in terms of how to maintain some traffic flow. But I do think it's an opportunity in July and August as the city is at a different pace and it's not fully open at this point to utilize some of the space here. But like I said, my job, and certainly help with the community board is to pick these wisely and pick them in places where it can potentially do the most help and without totally affecting the grid. But also, I'll tell you, I think I saw Rob Burns from the East 10 Midtown Partnership, Fred from Grand Central. Like, they're good partners here to help us figure these issues out as well. And I certainly want to make sure they're part of the conversation. But yeah, you're right. We're going to have to maybe do some shared streets in some places. We're going to have to maintain traffic in some places. But I think we're trying to say maybe we can do half rather than give everything over to the traffic and make these guys have to open up in a real way, like much later on. And that will that truthfully would just sink some of these restaurants and bars. Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's end with Kevin.
Hey, Keith, thank you so much for this initiative. I think it's so important. Clearly, you're going to have some businesses very happy if they're on the open streets. Obviously, those that are not might not be so. Was there talk at the council level about making amends, allowing those that are not on the closed streets but nearby, for instance, to come on to those open areas?
Yeah.
Hurdle here.
No, you've nailed it, and thank you for that question. Like, it would be unfair, right? If we maybe you'd feel unfair if we closed down, one side of the street, let everybody take advantage of one side of the street, and we didn't do it for the other side of the street. Like, how would you feel if you were paying rent right across the street? That's a very, very big challenge. I will say, there are ideas as far as like let everybody kind of like apply to use their parking spaces in front or their curb space just to do a little bit more service or spread out. There's proposals that say close a whole street down. There's ones I've even heard of like utilize like plazas and rotate who gets to use it every day. You're totally right. That's the hardest challenge, and I'll be honest, like that's gonna be the hardest challenge here all along. But I don't want us to fall into the trap, though, is not being able to figure anything out and never do anything. I think we have to work from yes and work down those issues. One proposal, we could look at is taking some side streets off and allowing in a geographical area for different people to be able to use them if they aren't able to take more advantage of their space right outside. But I honestly, I think that to me is one of like the central issues is we don't want to create winners and losers. We want to create opportunities. If you can help me think through that issue, I'd be eternally grateful. If you guys can identify how that can work. But one proposal might be on 2nd and 3rd Avenue, for instance, you take away, you do like a shared street here and you let those who are on the different sides of the streets be able to take advantage of space. But I haven't figured that out, and it's probably on the top of the issues that we have to resolve. So if you guys want to send me ideas on how to do that, I'd be happy to. I'd happy to steal some of your ideas on how to do that. But yes, totally right to say it's an issue.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And I think, Keith, we have one last question from Asia.
Hi, Keith. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks so much. This is really important, really interesting, and I really appreciate the question around equity to the businesses, because that did come up for a board within
you're breaking up
different
right now.
community boards. Also, that could not have the ability to go out on the streets and sidewalks.
You were breaking up.
My question is around, the regulatory authority. I know some of the other states have implemented restaurants. Oh gosh, okay, hold on. Can you hear me now? I think it might be a. Hold on.
Also, maybe you get into the Q&A section and one of us can read it out loud.
Okay, I think she's typing it, and I couldn't hear it either. And I just mentioned, I think I heard Askia mention other cities. I think Boston's doing this now. I think Chicago came out with a plan for it. Nassau County announced it today. San Jose's been doing it. Cincinnati, I think.
Hear about Tampa. Tampa's doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we're harder. Our area is harder because every street is Main Street in Manhattan. But okay, I think Askia's question is, gotcha. Yeah, so the question is about implementing models with plexiglass to separate folks. Like, look, there's going to be some version of social distancing as we open up, folks, and even in phase 3, and that's going to include masks. It's going to include potentially some social distancing or separating. I think most likely is going to be around capacity reduction. I saw some bar owner, I think in Glendale yesterday, did a presentation where he had plexiglass up. It's one solution. I don't think we're mandating that at this point, and want to be careful of adding too much expenses to folks. But I think it's going to be time, a good testing and tracing model here in the city to track folks, as they may get sick, and social distancing capacity, and that might include tables being 6 feet apart from each other, only being able to dine with people that you, I don't know, have live with. I don't know, whatever the regulation would be, but there's certainly going to be some regulations up front, which only speaks to me about the necessity to add capacity in some way, in a safer way.
All right. Thank you, Keith.
No, thank you. And I think you guys are going to get a proposal tonight. And I just tell you, Ken and those guys have reached out to me a bit on it, and I'm glad they're bringing something forward in the district. So I'll look forward to your guys' feedback on that. But thank you, everybody, and stay safe and healthy. Thanks for the questions.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right. And next up, let's go to Sam, because I know he has to leave pretty soon, if not now.
Yeah.
So.
No worries. So I was asked to join to speak a little bit about Senator Hoylman's proposal about his new legislation that would allow restaurants to offer drinks to go past the end of the pandemic. The bill would allow drinks, the current model, for 2 more years. And we've heard kind of what this last proposal was aiming at addressing. Restaurants are hurting bad, and this model of allowing to-go drinks has really been a bright spot for a lot of these businesses, bringing in more revenue and keeping them afloat. So we are looking to do that responsibly, being able to allow that to continue while taking into account the community's needs. So this bill would continue to allow this process for 2 more years. It would require beverages to be sold in closed and sealed containers. It would require that the drinks be purchased with food, so not just individually. And it also does not alter the open container law. So this is not meant to be, you buy it and then you go party outside of the street, outside of the restaurant on the street. It's meant to be takeout. You go home and you drink. You can have a marg with your meal. So that's kind of the idea. It would also require SLA to conduct regular outreach to community and community board, solicit feedback, hold hearings on the implementation, and allow for the removal of the off-premise privilege, which would, if a particular location becoming a problem spot for whatever reason, there's going to be, the bill would allow for, feedback, and if necessary, allow for that provision of to-go drinks to be removed without removing the whole liquor license. So that's the proposal. And, we'd love to hear from the board, hear what your concerns are, hear how we can make it better. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. And so while people are formulating their question, just remember the question and answer function on Zoom. It's called Q&A. So if you have any questions, please submit them there. But as we're waiting for that, just to let you know, later on in the agenda, we'll actually be going through the bill. So we'll be able to discuss it, in further detail and actually look at the provisions that Sam just went through to see, how this would function, how this would work, the impact that it would have on the businesses as well, because obviously we're in unprecedented times. So we have to start thinking outside of the box and think of solutions that can help us temper the storm that we're in right now. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand or you question and action. I'm not seeing anything yet. So, okay, I'll just give couple more seconds.
Yeah, and I'm always, I'm always available over email. So, if you think of anything going forward, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is svasquez@nysenate.gov, and I will put it in the chat below.
Thank you very much. All right. So as Sam does that, I'd like to get to the next part of our agenda, which is actually to hear from the bids in our district. And so tonight we're very fortunate to have 3 different bids represented. We have Fred Cerullo from Grand Central Partnership. We have Rob Burns from East Midtown Partnership. And we also have Ed Janoff from Union Square Partnership. So thank you all for joining us today. And I thought what would be great about this conversation is to really hear from each of you. And I know you've put something together as bids to get these plans started. But it'd be really great to hear what you're hearing from your membership and the things that we can do as a community board to best support those initiatives. So Fred, let's start with you, Fred.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me and the bids participate in the meeting tonight. We're all out there collectively trying to just keep the neighborhood as stable as can be, and obviously plan for the immediate future, which we're hopeful will actually be realized in hopefully a few short weeks. Just a quick update on the bid and the bid's operations, since it serves so much of CB6. While we, as sort of an executive office, has been working from home like most administrative and office employees, our field staff, our public safety officers, and our sanitation sweepers have remained in the field 7 days a week, although on modified schedules and in sort of modified size. But we have been working every day, continuing to do what we do by cleaning the streets and emptying the pails, although there's far fewer people in the neighborhood creating trash. But also our public safety function, which is critically important to our day-to-day work, and working with the NYPD pay detail program, which we do on a daily basis, has helped to create some stability. I'm sure you all monitor the crime statistics from the precincts that cover CB6. We as a bid are covered in part by the 14th, the 17th, and the 18th. So, the 17th in Midtown North and South. While crime generally has been down, we've been very fortunate as a community to see the commercial burglaries, which seem to have a spike during this COVID period, where many businesses have been closed. We actually have not seen that statistic in our area, which actually says a lot, and we're very fortunate in that respect. But We are continuing to do whatever we can do. If you've made your way through the neighborhood, you've seen the plantings, which we did not stop doing as we were deemed essential in the public health and safety functions that we perform. So we've tried to make the experience in our neighborhood seem as normal as possible, even in these very abnormal times. Of course, our day-to-day work is also about communicating with our stakeholders, whether they're property owners or brick and mortar retail at the street level. We all know, it goes without saying, that the business closures have been devastating, and that's why we, as an association of bids, all 76 of us, work very closely together on a daily basis, particularly during these times, on trying to support initiatives that could help our business community come back and stabilize, even though we know it still will be very difficult. And that's why we supported the underlying initiative that the Hospitality Alliance was putting forth to help restaurants come back, and about looking at how outdoor space could be used to facilitate that. And just this morning, as the councilman mentioned, and it's always hard to follow the councilman, legislation was ultimately introduced for the public to now contemplate, for the bids and the community boards to share their opinions on, that hopefully will reveal some locations throughout the district where restaurants could do business in the public realm. And what that means is not clear right at the moment, but we know that the bill, I did get to see the bill does provide for a variety of options. I think, Kevin, you mentioned, or you asked this question, it could provide for existing plaza space to be used either exclusively or non-exclusively. Obviously, in our area, it doesn't necessarily connect to the CB6 portion of our district, but Pershing Square East and West are locations where people now could come, take out food, and sit and enjoy it, so long as, of course, we're allowed to put our tables and chairs back, which right now we are not. The 43rd Street shared street concept is something we are looking at seeing if we can expand. And I think Keith mentioned some other areas, but we are, now that there's legislation, we are working with the stakeholders, and obviously we will share all these potential ideas with the community board about what areas there could be. I think someone mentioned the competition on the sidewalk. I think that's a very real issue for us to keep in mind, because, a month ago we were talking about finding new public space opportunities for pedestrians because of social distancing requirements and needs. And now we're talking about business operations on the sidewalk. So we keep having to kind of shift, which I think means some of the street lanes might be the answer to this, but it's not going to work everywhere. I don't think there's a one size fits all on a block or in a community. And so we're going to have to be really sensitive and thoughtful about those options. But we are prepared to do it. I think the underlying concern for us as a bid, who's in the quality of life business, which is how I like to frame our work, because it's always hard to explain to somebody what is a bid and what do you do, is that once the city makes the determinations, what are the requirements to how you protect the people if they're in the street? And we already know from, NYPD and counterterrorism and the concerns that they have about protecting the public while they're in areas where there are vehicles and people that can share the space. They're not design people, and they just think about the safety only. And what we don't want is our neighborhood just full of Jersey barriers and cement blocks. We need to figure out how to continue to have a neighborhood feel that is psychologically something people want to enjoy and doesn't create anxiety and a sense of unsafety. So I think there's so many aspects to this, but I can assure you that, we're doing our best to now work with everyone involved, the restaurants particularly, to come up with some ideas that we ultimately can share with you. The most important piece of the legislation is it does say that the community boards and bids, if there are bids in the neighborhoods, are entities that really need to be a part of this dialogue. So that makes me feel good, but it's all in DOT. It will be in DOT's hands. So we need to ensure that they're looking at all the aspects of what makes our neighborhoods tick, and not to just broad brush every neighborhood equally, because we are all a little bit different, and we don't want to lose our character in this. That's what makes our businesses special, our individual characters. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions, unless you want to go through all the bids and then we can all do it in one big mess. It's up to you.
So I was thinking that, yeah, so if anyone has any questions, as Fred and Rob and Ed continue to discuss their priorities and their ideas, please put that in the question and answer function, and we can, answer that at the end of the bid speaking, because I'm sure there's a lot of collaboration on your end anyway, a lot of overlap. So you guys can probably answer questions together. But Rob, if you want to take the floor now.
Sure. Thank you, Kyle. First, I apologize for coming here late. I was doing clearly it was like a national podcast. They clearly made a bad mistake. They thought they were going for someone else, I guess, but I had to wear headphones, and therefore my COVID hair is even worse than usual. But
it looks good.
These are those days. I'm just going to echo. I mean, Fred said it all. There's no reason for me to retread the same ground. We want to do what we can to get business back, to get life on the streets back, to keep it, excuse me, to keep it safe, of course, safe for the patrons of the restaurant, safe for the residents and pedestrians also. A little concern in the legislation was introduced today.
Good point.
About vending, because it seems to take a lot of restrictions off of vending, but I guess one battle at a time. This is a temporary thing, and right now the restaurants really need this. We will have to, we haven't had a lot of time to do a deep dive into the legislation, so we will be doing that. I'm sure you all will be too. And there might be places at this time that street vendors are appropriate, and we can all decide that based on our own priorities. But in the meantime, it's important, a restaurant, well, right now, of course, nobody could go inside, but to stop the congregation outside of bars and restaurants, to stop the lack of frankly, the threat to the public health and safety of pedestrians when they have to go through large crowds. I think it's important to start opening some streets. I see that Brian Owens is here, and I know, I hope I didn't miss your presentation, but I think that, a lot of our local restaurateurs have been very good community members, maybe not the patrons all the time, but look, they have to, that they are doing a great job and keeping the economy strong. And I would look very kindly on opening stretches of second, first. I guess York was in the mix, but that doesn't apply to CB6. But these are streets that were identified by Keith and Ben Kalos and Gail Brewer as priority areas. The only and I'll just kind of end on that. It's going to be your decision, but I think this bid would look favorably upon whatever can be done to open streets for the restaurants during this temporary emergency, but albeit a huge emergency. The only other thing I want to throw out, and I mentioned this because I saw one or two people from Community Board 8, I believe, that are also, kind of visiting the meeting. And I thank Kyle too, and everyone else on this committee. Over the last month or so, CB8 and now CB8 had organized a bunch of East Side, Upper East Side community groups, including the East Midtown Partnership, the Madison Avenue Business Improvement District, Carnegie Hill Neighbors, East 86th Street Association, and the East 60s Neighborhood Association. Because on setting up a series of seminars on how to responsibly reopen. And I'm glad that CB6 is a full partner now in this, because the lessons that we're going to learn, the information we have to impart is universal. And so, you know, it was great to see Kyle in the meeting, well, Kyle's name in the meeting at least the other day. And we will, you know, these start next Thursday at 6:30, when we'll be talking public health and safety with Captain Gallagher from the Central Park Precinct, a specialist on public health, and the panel will be moderated from Jessica Walker of Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. So I'm sure the word will be spread to you, but please do join, because the lessons out there are something, they're not community board specific. They are everybody from here to, you know, across the nation can learn the same lessons about how best to open and take into account public health and safety, the wellness of employees, the wellness of customers, and the legal requirements series that's going on into July. So that's all I have to say, except for thank you for having me. I'm remiss. I don't get to CB6 often. It's actually easier this way, sitting in my apartment and dialing in. But we appreciate everything you do, and you know, please never hesitate to reach out, either through Molly or Kyle or just directly to me. And frankly, I'm the only employee of the East Midtown Partnership basically these days. So you know, feel free to just email. It's going to be me that picks it up. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Rob. And yeah, and for everyone, I'll be going into further detail during my chair's report about the partnership with CB8, which has been a wonderful collaborator. We actually have the chair of CB8 on the meeting with us as well. Her name is Alita. So we thank her and the rest of CB8 and the committee for partnering with us on that. So thank you so much. Ed, you want to go ahead? You're on mute right now, so you have to unmute yourself.
Yep. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you, CB6. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I don't think I've met most of you. I joined Union Square Partnership in November. And Jennifer Falk, our executive director, sends her best. She couldn't be with us tonight. We are in planning mode. Our annual meeting is on Monday. We're doing the Union Square Partnership, which has a meeting every year, is doing its annual meeting virtually this year. This will be our first attempt at that, and that's 3 o'clock on Monday. And that will give you a good recap of kind of what happened last year and what we're thinking about for the future. So I encourage you to join us at 3 o'clock on Monday, and you can hear much more than I'll be able to share tonight. I just wanted to give you sort of like a status report on the state of business in Union Square. You know, we really, like everyone else, have been hit really hard, and I'm really encouraged by the collaboration I'm seeing between my sister bids and the community boards and, you know, different cities, and we're all watching what are the good ideas. It's very, you know, very fertile ground for creative responses, but, you know, we really have very unique challenges here in New York, not just because of the built environment, but also really the scale of the health crisis that is ongoing here. And it makes it really complicated to make some of the moves that we see other people making. But we want to do as much as we can. You know, it's really been devastating to our business community, and the patient is very much still on the table, to use an analogy. And you know, we really want to focus for Union Square on the organs of the patient, you know, as much as the extremities, because, you know, we're looking at the institutions that make up Union Square really what drive the traffic that everybody feeds on. And the majority of the ground floor businesses in Union Square remain closed, but they are mostly looking forward to the opportunity to open sometime in the future. You know, only a very small number have actually gone out of business. Most of them are still waiting to reopen. The essential businesses which are still open are primarily the grocery stores, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, pharmacies, medical, fast casual dining, especially those who figured out delivery, and then a few specialty shops and a limited number of restaurants. And, you know, almost all of them are experiencing a really marked decline in sales. And many of them are only open as a community service or a goodwill gesture for the neighborhood and frontline workers, just because they feel like it's their duty to to be available to people. The green market, which is one of the organs, the critical organs of Union Square, had a lot of challenges when the crisis arrived, figuring out with all these different farmers how to do spacing, how to do crowd control, how to do safe handling, cash transaction. They're operated by Grow NYC, and they've got a really great general manager, and we tried to support them a lot in figuring it out. I think they've got good protocols in place now, a good system down. They are seeing actually a gradual uptick in business now. Farmer participation is kind of incrementally recovering, although the market is still at a fraction of its normal size. But we've taken note that people do like and appreciate the opportunity to shop outside in fresh air with the opportunity to distance. People seem to feel very comfortable shopping that way. So that's good. And if it gets too crowded, the green market can shut down and do crowd control if they have to. Those opportunities are in place for them. So kind of interesting to watch that model evolve. A few businesses are starting to reopen that are allowed to. Paragon has a side entrance that they converted into a bike shop so they could operate a bike shop. 5 Napkin Burger opened today for pickup and delivery. So even some people who had closed are starting to see that there's a bit of a window for them to do some business here. We don't have detailed pedestrian counts, but we're looking at MTA data, and we're looking at our Wi-Fi usage in the park. That doesn't give us raw numbers we can use, but it does give us sort of percentage numbers that will help us gauge, how much activity we're seeing. I think when the pandemic first hit, March 16th, when schools were closed, we saw an immediate 85% reduction in activity, and that jives with the MTA's numbers. But now we're up to as much as 25 or even 30% of what our normal traffic would be on nice weather days. So, that's still a devastating decrease in activity, but it's double where we were a few weeks ago. And in our neighborhood, for the most part, the feeling is between the vast amount of open space at Union Square and the side streets, people are able to get around and make those connections to their transportation choice to where they're going with adequate distancing so far. We are conducting an analysis of our district. I think many bids are doing it. We've got 2 planners on our staff, me and one other, looking at we're creating layers that are going to analyze all the ground floor retail in our district and where are the clusters of businesses that could be opportunities for supportive public realm interventions, like the seating for restaurants. And restaurants are being talked about a lot because people can't just come in and buy something and leave. They actually need to dwell for a period of time to consume. So really most of their indoors is taken up by seating. So like many other districts, we're looking at for those seating opportunities and aware of all the complexities that have already been discussed tonight. So we have already looked at that map. We're breaking down businesses by table service restaurants, fast casual restaurants, straight bars, different kinds of retail and shopping. Then we're also layering on where are sidewalks wide versus where are sidewalks narrow. Where are streets, heavier traffic and more important in the citywide network versus kind of less important streets that, these are things that might create opportunities. We don't know if we're going to be able to do anything, but we want to be prepared as the city kind of unveils these opportunities. So, I don't want to get premature, but I can just tell you, I've already looked at some of these maps preliminarily. 14th Street between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue, lots of small scale dining establishments on both sides of the street and parking lane opportunities there. 17th Street and Broadway, huge concentration of dining establishments right there. Broadway in general, low traffic street, opportunities there. Irving Place, University Place, low traffic streets, opportunities there. I don't know what we would do yet, but we are, we're thinking about it. And we really want to hear directly from our businesses. We're having conversations with them. They're interested in opening. They don't know what is realistically going to be allowed. They don't know how it's going to operate. Do they have to pay for it? Do they have to maintain it? You know, what can the bid do? What can the city do? All those discussions are happening. We don't have answers yet, but we want to do, you know, we want to try to do as much as we can. So to layer another level of data on our analysis, we'll be doing a business survey in the next month to try to ask, you know, who would want to open and what do you need, and see if we can provide it, and if we can't, if the city can help.
Fantastic. So much. Thank you so much for that breakdown. Cody and Brendan, could you put up the, awesome. So this is the bill that was introduced just a couple of hours ago, actually, that's being referred to here. We'll have this shared as well if you can read it. But and we'll go further into detail about this later on. But I have a couple of questions for the bids, and you know, whoever wants to answer it can answer it. And at the same time, I'd also encourage any of the attendees or members of the public or members of co-op boards to also provide some questions or feedback, because I think one of the great things about having all of the heads of the bids here is that it's also great for them to hear some input from the community as well that they can bring back to their membership. So if there are any suggestions or things that you're, you know, wary of, I think that would also be great to bring up as well. But the first thing that I'd like to throw to you guys is, you know, we've heard obviously a lot about the open streets. And if you could put it in a perspective for us and for people who are not business owners or restaurant owners, what would sort of, you know, it's almost as this is like the silver bullet that this would, you know, help everybody recover and then we'd get back to normal. Can you put into perspective what kind of impact this would have for your membership, for the businesses? And then, you know, aside from the open streets, what other, you know, actionable things can we do as a committee and as a community board to support you, aside from open streets, if there are other initiatives or kind of support that you would need?
Well, it won't
Sure.
change. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
No, I'm sorry, Rob. We have a little delay, so I apologize.
I was just going to say it will change things a bit positively. It will not save the hospitality industry. It will only be when we're past the virus, whether through herd immunity or through a vaccine, that and restaurants are able to open at a decent capacity, that we'll be there. But it will help, much like, frankly, much like takeout and delivery is helping, especially, and I wish I could thank Keith, I hadn't thought of it, but especially now that the cap on third-party delivery services have been enacted, every little bit counts right now. If Brian can't have people eat in right now, they only have to kind of hang out up front. If he can put a couple tables out, then he's got something to turn around. Excuse me. Hopefully, sooner rather than later. I'm a realist. I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I'm a realist. So I think it's going to be later rather than sooner. But when we get to the point where people can start eating inside, he's still going to be restricted heavily on how many people can go in. So they're going to need, weather determinant, going to need some outdoor space. We're going to get to a point where, you know, takeout and delivery is only going to go so far. I'll leave it to the pros in the business to boil the numbers down. But right now, everybody I know that's doing takeout and delivery is at best just losing a little bit of money. Nobody's making any money. And so anything we can do right now to allow, first it'll allow a little more capacity, but secondly, it will, by opening up some street area, you will be putting those pedestrians that now might feel and might very well be at risk as they walk through crowds waiting for their food or whatever. You know, you'll have more space, more spacing. You know, that's all. Now, Fred.
Oh, well, I mean, so I would just say, just add that what we hope this does is first respond to the industry. The industry is calling for this. So somewhere in this proposal, they see themselves as being able to potentially survive better than they would if this kind of initiative didn't happen. I think what this does also, since as we all know, restaurants are and bars and lounges, it's part of the it's such a part of the vibe of New York City, that to get to see them operating again, they draw people into our neighborhoods also, which actually could be very helpful to other businesses that are not in the food and drink industry that are reopening and trying to operate themselves. So I think that there's a sort of an additional benefit that goes beyond the restaurant industry. I think the one uncertainty that we all have is one, the weather, and obviously outdoor dining works only in good weather, and that's something we cannot guarantee. And also, we don't know what the culture will be and how people will feel about any of this anyway. But I think what our job is, or at least how we see our job, is to ensure that there are options that are being made available for our businesses to come back. What ends up happening may be a very different story. Obviously, we all hope that's not true, but these are baby steps. And I think everybody understands that they're temporary in nature, at least at this point. One could argue that when the city does something and they call it temporary, it never actually is. But at the same time, we do know that we have to do something. And the good thing is that if we're acting sooner than the crowds come back, and there is a new footprint on some of our blocks, people will get used to what's there, what they find when they return. And I think it's easier to create the new environment in this period of time than try to change it once people are back and having sort of their day-to-day, how they move, where they go, already sort of set in stone. So hopefully this will be a winner, not only for the restaurants, but also for the other retail businesses along any strip where a restaurant is operating.
Yeah, I would
Oh.
definitely echo what Fred said, which is that, I don't know how much of a difference any of this is really going to make for the bottom line of most of these restaurants, but they're asking for it, and we want to support them however we can because they feel it's important. There is nothing that the 14th Street Partnership can do in the public realm that would replace the value of NYU bringing its students back, of Con Ed bringing its employees back full time, of people returning. But if we can do these interventions and make the public realm look and feel like a safe, active, fun place, put people in it, restore dining opportunities, I think this can have the kind of snowball effect that people start to say, oh, it's okay to come back, and try to get us safely to a place where it's actually starting to have that meaningful impact for the bottom line of our businesses who really need it.
Thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that I want to hit on too is what Fred mentioned about, like weather. This is about good weather too. And it's important to note, if you can't see on the legislation, if you want to visit the website, Cody put the link in the comment section, but there is an expiration date of October 31st. There is a seasonable aspect to this. Obviously, good weather means people will be able to stay out. Bad weather means that they can't. So there is, I know a lot of fear often stems from, what Fred just said. A lot of times things that come in as temporary end up, being there for generations. And this is something that very clearly has a specific end date that they've put in to see, what can be done with this unprecedented situation. And going to the other point too, and I encourage everyone else to ask, any questions or comments that you have now as well, because we have 3 great leaders in the business sector here who have, represent a number of small businesses in our neighborhoods. But we're facing unprecedented times. This is, on one level, it's about making sure that we still have tacos in the neighborhood, but it's making sure that we still have the character of our neighborhoods, that we're supporting the workers that are part of the, of the business as well. And later on, we'll hear from one of our small business owners themselves, Brian Owens, who has a great presentation set up for us. But this is also about, the maintaining of our neighborhoods and the character and the shape of it and what we want it to look like. And so as we go forward with these ideas, we have to start thinking about what can have any impact whatsoever. It doesn't have to be the solution, but what are some things that can help us get to that point where we're stable, back to stability, where we're treading water. And this is one of the proposals out there, and there are other different ideas that we can come up with ourselves, and we'll hear from Brian as well about some of the ideas that he and a number of other businesses have come together on in the neighborhood. But I want to then, just circle back once again and say, are there any other actionable ideas outside of, the open spaces, whether it's maybe support from a city agency or other ideas that would be helpful to the small businesses, or maybe things that you're hearing about that we're not hearing as a community board that would be helpful on our end, whether to, make it louder, to highlight, or anything of that nature, or things you want us to be thinking about as we discuss these ideas?
I would just say, I can't, well, look, there's other things that business will need, and there could be other initiatives that may be coming out of the city or state that seem to be attempting to help business, but might actually have a contrary impact. The bid association follows those things. It could be helpful. And again, I don't have any particular example on this now, but there could be other policy or legislative issues that come up that really are not helpful to the business community, or could be very helpful to the business community, and having the community board weigh in on those could be extremely helpful. I think the one issue that has come up, and this is such a sensitive and delicate issue, but I know it's an issue that many of the bids have. Certainly we are not exempt from this issue, but as people begin to come back and there's more activity on the street, that the community board and the bids and the local precincts and the homeless service providers are coordinated in their efforts to deal with those who need help, that are out on the street and will return to the street. Because the more people that come back, there will be more people coming back also, because they think that there's people who will help them and give them money or give them food. And while there are still issues out there now, I still go into the district and I see the ones who are out there now are the most in need. But I think that as we come back, it's not going to be helpful to business, especially if they're doing business on the sidewalk or on the street, that the quality of life around them is problematic or people feel not safe. So I think we all need to collectively think about those issues and obviously be thoughtful and sensitive and compassionate, but at the same time, be practical and try to coordinate response to that if those needs become necessary.
Fred's point's well taken. I think the only other thing I'd add, obviously, restaurants are important, and they're particularly important at this point. But we need to also keep in mind retail is going to need a little flexibility outside too, as we phase in. Right now, you can only have one person inside your store in most cases. So, when it comes to putting signs up, perhaps putting signs out to space customers outside, or putting signs out for curbside pickup, things like that. I mean, that's down the road, but keep it in mind. And no, we're not going to let the nail salons go out to the curb. So don't. Yeah.
Based on my years of working at New York City DOT, I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is we want people to come back. How the heck are they going to get around? I think there's 1.6 million daily inbound commuters into Manhattan before COVID. 300,000 drive-in, 1.3 million mass transit, walking and biking. There is no such possibility where driving could ever replace what was lost so far by mass transit. We're going to have to get people back on mass transit, and if it's not going to come back to 100%, we're talking about a million people that need to find a different way to get into Manhattan. And it's not going to be driving. So you kind of were asking about what are bigger things you could be thinking about. We really need to see some kind of a plan for how we're going to get people to be getting back into the city in a realistic way. And it's going to have to involve probably some robust surface transit infrastructure, meaning buses and e-bikes and bike share. That's what I think a lot of smaller cities have done, and I have to think that City Hall and DOT are they're obviously aware of the problem, but I just want to be realistic about expectations that if people are going to come back, we have to find a way to get them here.
All right. And that's actually a great segue. We have a question from the chair of our transportation committee. So Sandra, take it away. And for all the rest of the panelists, if you have questions, just click the raise your hand. If you're an attendee, use the question and answer function.
And I wondered if any of the bids have sponsored or requested open streets in our district. If they weren't accepted by DOT, or if you haven't, if there are any recommendations that you would make for streets that would be good for open streets based on what you know about businesses along them.
So, Sandra, we did not. Oh, there's Rob and I doing it again. So I would just say quickly, Sandra, it's a great question. We have not. The last round where we just came from with the open streets proposal, you had to, not only would you propose it, but you had to propose it and then also be responsible for the opening and closing of the street, which based on how we're functioning right now is not something we could have even contemplated. I will also let the community board know that we would never recommend a closure of a street without communicating with the community board. So that goes without saying. So, but at the same time, what we have been doing is focusing on the plazas that we have, which right now for us, except for the 43rd Street shared street, which we are evaluating to be better because everyone, the councilman, DOT, I've spoken to Molly about this, it's not working in the footprint that the city had provided. And we have an opportunity right now because we are trying to expand public space to make it actually make more sense, make it feel better for people, safer. We have put out a lot of money if you've seen 43rd Street, we replaced most of the granite blocks with big planters that NYPD approved. They're quite expensive. We plant them, which is quite expensive. But again, this goes to my original point about we have to balance the locations, but with some level of beautification, so our neighborhoods still look like something you want to enjoy and experience. So this new bill is sort of creating a different chapter of what open streets or use of streets can be. And as Keith indicated at the beginning, that's what we're looking at now. But we certainly would be communicating with you guys if there's anything in CB6 that we would be looking at. I think also though that the community board can make recommendations as well directly. And
We
and I don't
have.
know if
We
and
have
they've
a-
been, yeah.
We have
Have
a
they been
resolution that recommended streets, and actually, we have found that opening the street, it's just, you put out the barricade, you take it away. It's actually not a very onerous condition. to
Okay.
have to fulfill.
I just like to jump in and say I have not. Keith's office did reach out to me.
Mm.
I did. Well, first of all, I've never. I mean, I do have a street cleaning crew. They're mostly engaged in disinfecting things these days. Although I know the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, well, I use the Doe Fund, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And I know the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership also uses them. And they do have them moving their barricades. It didn't frankly occur to me. I'm just really glad when I see them not just standing out at the coffee cart all day. My security team, which is the Rock, I mean, most of them have been with me for almost the full 18 years that my bid's been in existence. But I've reduced them. I'm paying them full time, but I've reduced them to 2 days a week. In actual FaceTime in the district because they're all commuting, and I couldn't see myself risking their health on mass transit for $17 an hour as an average, where I got to make a lot more money and go sit in New Jersey. I'm not in New Jersey, I'm sorry, I'm in Manhattan somewhere. I'm in CB6 actually, yeah. But I deferred based on the manpower, but also at the time that under the old DOT, or the original DOT regulations, the only street that would have really applied, because they didn't want cross streets included, and they didn't want truck or bus routes included.
Bus routes, right.
It would have been Park Avenue for 7 blocks. And I didn't have the manpower, and I couldn't afford outside manpower. Now that said, though, things are getting a lot more liberal from the city side. I still may not have the manpower to take care of it, but will I encourage it within reason and within the approval of the community board? 6, 8, and 5 are all in my district, but yeah. I mean, I probably can't be the guy putting out the barricades, or my staff can't, but will we be fully supportive? Yes. And I might, look, when I stopped my security team from, when I slowed them down, I should say, cut them down from 5 days a week to 2 days a week. That was 2 months ago, and things are slowly changing. Things are, we all know, nor close to normal, but do I feel the level of high risk anymore? No, and maybe I should, of course, when I call them back, I can't buy their lunches every day. I'm single-handedly responsible for the redistribution of wealth in the second quarter of fiscal, whatever this year is, 2020. Yeah, I think I'll start bringing people back, and that might make it more feasible for us.
So I think we really want to encourage. Sorry, go ahead.
Just short answer, no. Most of our bid in CB6 is 14th Street. We're not looking at 14th Street as an open street right now. Irving Place, just outside of our bid boundaries, currently has a couple of blocks of open street, which we're supportive of. That's a good street to do it. And we've also been exploring Broadway, which has been, Broadway and University have been sort of functioning as a open street on their own during this. But we're looking at stuff, but as far as specifically in your bid, we're not looking at 14th, I'm sorry, in your district boundaries, we're not looking at 14th Street.
Well, and I just would really encourage you to help us open up some additional streets. I moved the barricades for our community board, so it's not that hard. It's very easy to do.
One question Sandra, I'm sorry to interrupt. One question though, that I'm getting way off topic, I'm sorry, but I asked DOT, they never got back to me. Do the barricades get stored or just set at the curb for being put out the next day?
We just rotate them. It's in the street, and then we rotate it over to the side.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be 7 days a week. we have Rutherford Place. I think it's only 1 day a week. So anything is appreciated.
Sure, I got you. Thank you.
Awesome. So are there any other questions before we end this part of the agenda from anybody, any panelists or attendees? Yeah, Seema, can we get Seema unmuted, please?
Yeah, thank you. I just have a question to follow up on. I know this is a little bit unrelated to the open streets work, but related to Kyle's question about other things we should be considering, you know, can I just kind of quickly ask if the alcohol to go, you know, extending the alcohol to go opportunity is like just overwhelmingly positive, like everyone to go from like the restaurant perspective in your respective bids?
So far, we haven't had any negative feedback on it.
I've only had positive.
We haven't received any feedback.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to check.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, next up, Yusuf.
Yeah, and this will be quick. And Kyle, we emailed a bit about this. I'd be interested to know from the bids whether there would be an interest in, or you've heard solicitations from like design or engineering firms that would offer their services to restaurants and storefronts for sort of like pro bono or like discounted redesign purposes. There are colleagues of mine in Illinois and in other places who are beginning to do this, and they're typically organized by like the restaurant or business association, but there's going to be a ton that'll have to be redone both inside the restaurants and then for whatever sidewalk space they get. So interested to know if you've thought about that, gotten solicitations, or if it's even on your radar.
I have not.
No,
it's a good thought.
It's a great thought. I think on the inside stuff, no, we have not been. No one has come to us about asking for anybody who might do this work. I think the outside issues, which obviously we would be focused on, and this goes to that whole sort of what's the quality of life around the business for people to enjoy. Right now, we don't even know what the city's going to permit. But there is, you know, the street seat program that DOT has that keeps coming up in meetings about is if we taking curb lane, you know, a lane from the curb, could you use a street seat so that it creates a nicer look? I think until we have a sense of what the physical requirements or permissions will be about what a restaurant can do outside, it's hard to know what the design would be. I think probably everybody saw David Rockwell did a design for restaurants for outdoor seating. You know, so there's a lot of thought about this, but there's nothing specific and no one yet has come to us. But Yusuf, it's a really good point. And if we do get any inquiries in that, I'll make sure that I let the community board know.
Thanks.
Yep, same. David Rockwell, their office is in our district. You know, we were excited by their design. I think they really want to help, and they've offered pro bono services for different types of treatments. But you know, unfortunately, what they've designed is it's expensive and it would take time to fabricate. So it's not an immediate response item. But we're continuing to have conversations with professionals across disciplines, architecture, engineering, planning, just to see what people are coming up with. So those are conversations that all the bids are having right now with their counterparts.
Kyle, can I ask one more question? This is Seema. Kyle?
Yeah,
that was a yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So one idea that I'm exploring in my day job, I work for the state of New York exposure. I don't know what
Seema,
that
I'm
is.
sorry.
Hello, can you guys hear me? I think that sound is gone, at least on my end. I just want to know. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I don't know where that came from or if it was me, but in my day job, It's back, isn't it? I don't know what that is.
Maybe if everyone else mutes themselves.
All right, I'll give this one more try. One idea we had that we're exploring is a Yelp, like a COVID, Yelp for COVID. So basically restaurants or essentially businesses in general, the retail and restaurants specifically, would be able to be rated along how much they're complying with various kind of COVID related regulations. So, is there healthcare for the workers? Are there masks provided? Is there testing provided? And a number of other kind of ways to like rank and determine if businesses kind of are meeting their requirements, contactless payment, et cetera, et cetera. There are a bunch of different things we're thinking about in my day job. So I'm curious if that could hold any muster or if that seems just kind of onerous and unnecessary.
I personally think that's a great way to kind of push good healthcare. I mean, yeah, I mean, there probably is. I don't know if there's a market per se. I would not push it with my members, just being honest. They would not be happy with me being the health police. Is there benefit in it to the consumer? Yes, of course. We know the Yelp model, which is you're mad because your fries took 5 minutes. So, I'm gonna, go on social media. So, I think though, the model that we've been pursuing is to educate our businesses to the highest level possible. I would really think that instead of a separate reporting thing, that everyone do be aware. Because we know there are businesses that won't comply with the best practices, or even the minimally safe practices. I mean, look, some businesses in the city don't do that now, or didn't do that. Sorry, in mid-March. Yeah, I don't know if something like that would fly. I'm a big proponent of peer pressure, but I'm also so fearful of abuse, and I could see where this could become abuse. You could refine it though. Sorry, I'll mute.
No, that's some great initial feedback. Yeah, we're toying around some ideas.
And just to confirm for everyone, the governor stated earlier today in executive order that businesses can refuse services if people aren't complying with the face mask requirement. So that was just put out there, which is a big concern that we had discussed earlier. Is everyone able to hear me or no? Can you hear me now? So okay, I'm seeing the hands. So what I was saying is the governor just released, I'll type it. I said it already, so I'll just type it. So I just put it in the chat box, which was that the governor said earlier today that businesses can refuse services if they're not wearing masks. So, all right. So are there any other questions of our guests before we move on in the agenda? All right, I don't see anything. Thanks again to Fred, Rob, and Ed for joining us today. This was very helpful to the conversation. Obviously, we will remain in contact.
Of course.
As we learn things, as you hear things, we'll continue to collaborate. So we thank you so much for it. You're free to stay with us for the rest of the meeting, but feel free to jump off because I know you guys are busy. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you
All
for having me.
right, Brendan, can you put up the economic recovery and relief plan?
Sure, just a moment. This?
Yeah. Can people hear me better now? I'm gonna try and call in.
I think Kyle's going to try to switch his audio to calling in. Give him one moment.
Hi, can
Hi, can everyone hear me now? Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So as everyone got before, I sent out the economic recovery and relief plan that Fred actually had forwarded to me and Molly earlier this month. These are some things that the business leaders of New York City have put together to address obviously a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. I sent it to everybody with some thoughts on it. Does anyone have any thoughts to begin with? Obviously, there are ideas about insurance, paycheck protection, sales tax, rent and mortgage. And one of the things that I prefaced sharing the plan with was that obviously as an advisory board, there are certain things that we can and cannot do, or things that we have more of a voice on than others. And obviously with some of the things that are regarding, federal policy, that might not be the best way to focus our efforts. But I wanted to see what everyone thought about some of the other things that we could possibly get involved with, and what people's overall thoughts were on this.
Brendan, can you zoom in?
Yeah, let me try and figure that out.
If you exit full screen mode, you'll be able to do it.
Jeannie, are you raising your hand or no? Oh, Jeannie's raising her hand. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Just a quick question. Whether or not you could add into this another coalition, the Independent Restaurant Coalition. That's a national forum, but they seem to have a pretty loud voice.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to have this initial conversation just because obviously it's not something we're going to solve tonight. And tonight I thought it'd be best to have the heads of the bids here. And because obviously, and this point was made earlier,
restaurants are a huge part of it, but there are also retail, and sometimes those plans are going to be just a little bit different. But yeah, so I wanted to focus on this because this plan, as everyone saw, was signed by almost every borough's chamber of commerce. They had the New York City bids on it. Obviously, all of the elected officials at every level were CC'd on this as well. But I wanted to get everyone's thoughts on this, what people thought, if there were things that you think we should get involved with, or maybe things we should stay away from. Just wanted to see what people thought about it. Any initial thoughts?
Kyle, it's Susan Steinberg.
Go ahead.
Couple of quick things. First of all, is this still in a draft or has it been sent out?
So this has been published. This is a letter that they sent to elected leaders. There was a press release that went along with it. So this is what they have put out.
It just seems to me that everything they mention is kind of not within our purview.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can certainly be supportive, but I don't, this is, as you say, it's mostly federal.
Right. There's some things we could do with sales tax. So I thought that was probably the thing that was most relevant to us, just because that's city and state. What people thought about, obviously, I mean, and this is kind of the thing that I want to preface all of our conversations with this. We are obviously not legislators. We're also have to recognize where we fit into the hierarchy and in the process. So there are, lots of ideas we can have that, may do really well, but we ourselves, by ourselves are not going to solve the economic crisis, but there are small, I think of us as being able to do incremental things or, essentially setting up a foundation or getting the little things done that could lead to bigger things. And so I just wanted to share this. It's also totally fine if we think that all of this is outside of our purview and, we shouldn't be taking any stances on any of the proposals. But I wanted to share it with the committee because it is something that exists out there that is on, the desks of all of these elected officials that they mentioned at the end. But if, I just want to sort of take everyone's temperature on this. And feel free to go through it again if you want to refresh.
Yeah, this is SEMA, if I could jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
go ahead.
I guess there are a couple of things that I think, to Susan's point, are largely federal that I'm not sure we have a lot of jurisdiction in, but I guess a general question is, Kyle, do you think that we could, kind of advocate or petition or co-sign some of the recommendations here? And do you think that's an opportunity for us, or do you think that's largely okay? So for me, I think I'd say the extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, both in terms of the timeline and then also what the money can be used for, because I think that there's a cap, and I am forgetting the exact numbers, but something like 15 or 20% of the money can be used towards rent and other kind of fixed costs. And I think I'd love for us to think about kind of expanding that, because that's just not how budgets break down, in the New York City market. So I think that's a great thing for us to advocate for, and also the timeline around it. My parents have small businesses in the city, and they're suffering from these challenges as well. And then I think the sales tax, I think that has been brought up a number of times to the state. So I'm curious if and the insurance thing, and then with the insurance, I know they're asking for the federal government to be involved, but you're picking winners and losers in the insurance business.
Exactly.
If you support business interruption insurance or business continuity insurance, or if you support funding that and paying that out. So I'll probably recuse myself because I work for the state agency that funds or sorry, regulates insurance providers in New York State. So I'm going to like recuse myself if we take a vote on that or anything. But I think I'm not sure that there's like a strong case there. I think there's the strong case in paycheck protection, that bullet, and a couple of specifics within that bullet. And then sales, I think that that's been raised. Like I've read so many articles on that being an opportunity. Even if it's seen as like micro grants, so businesses get their sales reimbursed back to them at a later point as a micro grant, which I think is like, they're interesting models, obviously for lenders, for restaurants or businesses. I'm not sure that how much that'll move the needle. Like I'm curious to hear if any of the bids are still on, if getting your sales tax reimbursed as a grant or a microloan, is effective. And then rents and mortgages, I don't know what to do with that one. I'm not gonna touch it because I'm not necessarily that versed in it. But those are my thoughts on those 4 bullets.
Perfect. No, that's a great point too, is just because they have listed all of these points, that's obviously what they came together on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to have a say on every single thing. So like Seema said, we can pull out some things that we might be interested in supporting or adding, our advice to, or maybe even amending in some ways. But, I always say, particularly, paycheck protection program and sales tax and rent and mortgages are things that we can actually have a say on. We already, for those who are new to the committee, we passed something in December 2018 about commercial rent control. And obviously right now you have a big movement of cancel rent. Obviously a lot of the focus has been on individuals and their housing issues, but there's also issues with property owners and business and small businesses. So there are things that we can kind of have a say on or push and nudge people in certain directions. And I wanted to put it out there to see if the committee had anything to say on that. But Seema, you had a question for the bids? Do you want to just reiterate that for them?
I was just curious if the sales tax, the way that it's stated in this document, which is kind of the reimbursing of sales tax, or potentially even just like eliminating sales tax potentially for an amount of time, like how impactful that would be in overall financial solvency.
Ed, am I the only bid person still here? Okay.
Yeah, I think Fred dropped off. Now you won't speak over each other.
I guess I'm on the hot seat. Damn, I was hoping no hard questions. Okay. Honestly, March, I want to say it was March 20th, I think was the last last quarterly sales tax filing. And we threw this in then. As you can see, the document is dated early April when we finally got everyone's act together. And the state and city, state at least, I think both, did extend that deadline for filing, or at least deferred, even if it was after the fact, deferred penalties and interest. And I apologize, I turned purple. I got to get better lighting in here. But it's a help. But look, that is money that is owed the state. I mean, we're cognizant, and city. We're cognizant state and city are going to need their revenues. It's really a case right now what we can do short term to help the businesses. And all of this is short term. This is not a forgiveness per se. I know this is reading turn it into a grant. I don't think anyone expected that to happen. All this will be, all this will be collectible eventually based on what the state legislature has passed. But when we wrote this language and our partners wrote this language, we were looking very heavily at what can we do right now to have a cash infusion for the small businesses to keep them going. So will it impact them? Yeah, somewhat, but I mean, it's not the biggest thing there.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this? I mean, I think there's an opportunity for us to, take a stance on something, whether it is the rent and mortgages or the sales tax, or as Seema mentioned, has some knowledge about, the Paycheck Protection Program. Would the committee like more time to review this and we can talk about it at our next meeting, or is there just no interest in supporting any of these proposals?
I know I'd
Yep.
like to support the paycheck protection
Mhm.
opportunity, but I'm happy
Okay.
to obviously go with the committee.
Just a thought. The government has put a freeze on tenant properties. And now we're looking at commercial and businesses that could potentially be evicted from their places of business. I'm personally feeling a little overwhelmed with all of this. I just don't know. This city is having a hard time getting federal assistance. I mean, I think that what we could do is be a voice, a louder voice, but the problem is so immense. I just don't know. I'm just stuck on what we can do to be helpful, other than to use our voice, a collective voice.
Right. So that just goes along with the point. I don't think anyone, at least that's not my intention, is not to say we want to solve the crisis at all. But what are some of the things that are being put out there? And, this plan right here was not a plan that I came up with or anyone else here came up with, but it was something that was put forth by business leaders. And so obviously I reviewed it and looked at it and wanted to share with the rest of the group and to see if there's anything that resonates there that we want to make louder or amplify. Yep. Can you hear me?
Hey. My gosh.
Get some head nods if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I got head nods. All right. Yeah. So what I was saying before was if I didn't come up with this plan and no one on the committee came up with this plan, but this is something that was put out by business leaders in New York City. So obviously I reviewed that. Obviously I want to share it with the rest of you. And the point of sending it is not to say, hey, we need to now figure this out and let's, put our heads together and get New York City out of economic crisis. But if there are points there that resonated, for example, a great example is just what happened with SEMA, who said, hey, this Paychecks Protection Program is something that's resonating with me. Maybe we should amplify it. Maybe there are some suggestions we can make. At the end of the day, as I was saying earlier, we're not the legislators. We're not the government. We're advisory. And I always like for us to be supportive of our small businesses, of our communities, and to have their backs. So sometimes, amplifying something actually does have a change. So if there is something in here that, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I'm hearing feedback from somewhere. But if there's something that resonates and we can support it and say, hey, this is a really good idea, this is something you should take into consideration, that's really our function, right? Is if we send a resolution to a city council member or to our local congressional member or even to the senator, maybe they get a look at it and say, hey, this is actually a good idea. This is something that, the legislators can take into consideration as we draft some kind of actual legislation. And worst case scenario, they ignore us, but at least we took a stand for our community. And we're in the exact same place as having done nothing at all, So I would rather risk, taking an action and voice on something than not doing something at all. But if you like it as it is and there's nothing particularly resonating about any of the points as a committee, that's totally fine as well. But I wanted to share it with the rest of us to see if we have any thoughts. I have a comment or question from John. You can unmute him.
Got it. Yeah, I agree with Kyle. I mean, I don't see the harm in our, calling this to people's attention. So I would support that. Yes, it is overwhelming. Yes, there's a lot out there, but these are bad times, and I would support endorsing one or more of these. That's, I guess, what I would have to say.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Kyle? Susan
Yep,
here.
go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
don't see any downside to being supportive of all of these points. I don't see why we wouldn't
Yes.
pull anything out.
Okay, is that how the rest of the community feels? Yusuf, you're live on the air. Go ahead.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I was having issues with the phone. I think the paycheck protection piece and also the property tax relief piece are both kind of very direct opportunities with multiplier effects for the community and for the city. I think they especially are useful for making sure the businesses are not stuck in like cycles of debt, that the sort of short-term support that they get will end up killing them, 6 months down the line. And at the end of the day, they both sort of encourage employment and, sustainability over the long term. So in favor of supporting all of it, but in particular, those 2 points.
Fantastic. Does anyone want to do we want to take a vote on support of
Kyle,
this
you have
and we can draft a
another hand.
resolution? Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Anton, you're up.
Yeah, I generally support this. I mean, this is such a generalized request or letter, and the details have to be worked out on a very short-term basis. But we have no input in these details. I think we all generally support these 4 things: insurance, paycheck, sales, and rent and mortgages. The question is, I think in the longer term, the legislature has to address is, how can we, or how can they fund these things, and how will this affect New York City economy for years, actually, because it's already doing that right now.
Right.
So John said, these are fairly innocuous, and there's nothing in there that is strikes me as being untowed or something we wouldn't do and support on a general basis.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah, no, and I agree with that assessment as well. I think quite often when we get plans like this and someone forwards this over or someone publishes this, there's kind of and this is what I love about community board, is that we're all such wonks that we start to fill in the details automatically. We're like, well, how would we actually do this? What would the process be? What should be, doing this and that? And I think that's great. But for some things too, it's, those details are beyond our scope as a community board. And it's just that some of these legislators or some of these stakeholders, like local business leaders, need that impetus to be able to move forward, and that is sometimes the community board support to say, hey, we endorse your spirit of this plan, or these are some things that we disagree with, and I think there is opportunity for us to do that here. Do people want to take a vote on this in support of it or against it, or is there anyone who has particular issues with any of them? Seema, you were saying something about the insurance.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing that I'm gonna, if we vote on supporting all 4, I'll just kind of abstain from that vote in general, just because it includes insurance and I work with that agency.
Yeah, and the other alternative too is that we could just endorse one of these ideas really well and do just a specific resolution on that, or we could kind of do one as an overall to say, hey, we are, supporting this whole plan and, whatever it might be. Do people have thoughts on that? Do they want to do specific or as overall?
Oh, I would go with endorsing the whole plan.
I agree with that. I don't want to call the question and cut off discussion, but I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree as well.
I agree.
Okay, so if someone wants to call the question and make a motion.
I will call the question.
All right, thank you, John. All right, is there a motion?
I move that we support the letter. Well, there are a lot of people who signed it. That we support the elements.
You can just say business leaders, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And can I second that, even if I called the question?
Sure.
Parliamentarily, I don't know whether I can.
Okay.
I tell you
so
what, I'll second it.
Okay, so seconded by Anton.
I'll call the roll.
Okay, so you'll call the roll. So the way we're going to do this is just we're going to go one by one for the committee members. And once you are called on, please make your vote on it. So if you're for it, please say you're for it. If you're against it, say you're against it. If you're abstaining, please say you're abstaining. And if you're abstaining for cause, say that you're abstaining for cause. So Seema, I think if you're choosing to abstain, you would say abstaining for cause.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
Kyle,
so Cody, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
No, that's you. You're first, alphabetic.
Oh, sorry. Yep, I'm for it.
Matt Bondi. Matt, I thought he had joined.
He was here.
I think he dropped off.
Okay. Dan Devine. He didn't join. Jeannie D'Onofrio.
Yes.
That's in favor. Paige Judge. Paige. Paige
She's
is
muted.
here. Trying to
She's muted.
have her unmute herself here. All right, Youssef.
I'm abstaining for cause.
John Keller.
Yes, vote in favor.
Anton Malner.
In favor?
Kevin O'Keefe.
In favor.
Seema Shaw.
Abstaining for cause.
All right. Susan Steinberg.
In favor.
Paige.
I'm on hold. I can't. What's going on?
We can hear you, Paige.
I can't hear you. I see your mouth
You just
moving.
responded to him, Paige.
What?
I said you just responded to his question.
I said favor.
All right.
In favor?
In favor, okay.
All right, that's 7 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstain, and 2 abstaining for cause. So that motion carries.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for that. And Seema, if you'd like to partner up on writing the resolution for that, please let me know, because I want to get other people involved in writing resolutions too.
Sure. I can definitely.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, let me know. All right, so moving on, this is the juicy part of the presentation. I thank you for all of our guests for waiting this long. I know we had a lively discussion. So to provide context, so Claire and I and Sandra were discussing the open streets after the last full board meeting and thought there were great ideas for collaboration, particularly with this whole open street stuff that was going on. And back when we were discussing it, they were ideas. Today, the bill was introduced. So obviously this is moving very, very fast. So I asked them to come together to put a presentation for us on some ideas of how this could work, because transportation obviously oversees open streets. And some of the ideas that we were discussing, and you know, Sandra already mentioned it earlier about bids or even small businesses sponsoring certain things and figuring out ways to make this work. And of course, we as a committee have had discussions on turning the street fairs into something that was more inclusive of local businesses. So I saw a lot of overlap over there and opportunities for us to work together on putting resolutions forth and getting some ideas there. So we'll start off with Claire and Sandra. And then we also have Brian Owens, who has been super, super patient as well, and has put together another presentation for us as well. And he is a local business owner. He owns Crave and Taco Vision and has been in the community for a long, long time. And again, very similar, you know, to just show you the speed of everything. We were having discussions maybe, you know, a week ago or so about potentially closing streets and open streets and all that. And then again, today, the bill is has been introduced. So this is an exciting time. And so I'll turn it over to Claire. And thank you so much again for joining us today and putting this together.
Yeah, thank you for having me and inviting me to your meeting. Covered a lot of this. I think that Keith really kicked the meeting off talking about the legislation that's out there now as of today. So a lot of this might be redundant, but I think that we can start the conversation about where we as CB6 members could see streets being open for business in our district. So this picture is from Tampa, not from New York, a far less an inferior city for sure, but they've figured it out post how to kind of open the streets. You can see there are still cars there, so that could be a potential solution and also there are other things that we could consider too. So Brendan, you could go to the next slide. So thinking about why, we've heard this already, but this picture is from the Upper East Side a few weekends ago. No social distancing because it's just impossible. The restaurant industry is definitely disproportionately affected by the virus. And this is a really great opportunity, I think, to enhance the character of our neighborhoods while supporting these businesses that really are struggling right now, as we've heard. You can hit the next slide. So this is just kind of some things that I was thinking about in terms of, this is like again, the legislation, but thinking about what this could look like. Would we want to close down entire streets, certain lanes, or just certain parking spots in front of businesses too? We've seen DOT, and I think actually Dan from the Union Square Partnership, I kind of wish he was still here because he used to apparently do a lot of the parklet programs when he was working at DOT, but there are a lot of ways to open streets and provide access either on the sidewalk when their sidewalks are wider or spilling into the streets. Sandy and I were kind of talking about what really like livable streets look like. And I think that the open street program is really ambitious and the city's trying, but there's a lot to be desired there. We need more than just some broken police barriers, but also these things are expensive. So I think that that's going to be a challenge that the city faces when rolling this out. Also thinking about hygiene and, maybe hand washing stations, and then certainly planters and trash receptacles. Brendan, you can go to the next slide. So this is actually in New York City. So this is Lilia in Brooklyn, and this is kind of like expanding space for a restaurant with not a whole lot of materials. There's paint on the ground and a few delineators and planters, but I think that this is like a really good example of what could be done and how to reclaim a lot of space in the district. We've talked about other precedent here, but Tampa, Hartford, Oakland, Nassau County now is starting to get on board with this initiative as well. So we can look to them, but as we said, New York is incredibly unique and has a higher population than all of these places. So that's something that I think the city will be considering. So now I guess moving to the discussion piece of it, Brendan, you can go to the next slide. Before the legislation was introduced, Ben Kalos, Keith Powers, and Gail Brewer co-signed an open letter. This was pre-Memorial Day, so they were actually asking for the city to act like really quickly and provide open spaces to the following locations that you could see there. Some of them did fall into our district map. You could see that they were asking for avenues, which I thought was kind of interesting in terms of opening those instead of side streets where there might be less traffic. But I think that we might have ideas and we might be able to continue the conversation, after the meeting because it is pretty late, but I would be interested to hear what folks on our board think are right, or maybe why certain blocks might not be ideal for this. And then of course, restaurant owners should have a say as well. We don't really have a lot of open streets in our district yet. Sandy was talking about the Kips Bay Alliance that's out there, and there's a little square around Stuyvesant Square Park, but there aren't so many restaurants in those two areas. So I think that we might want to suggest kind of new locations to add to these streets. And that could also be in collaboration with the bids that we were talking to earlier today. Yeah, and so I guess at this point we can kind of talk, and if anyone has any ideas for specific locations, please speak up or feel free to reach out after the meeting. I just think that this is a really great opportunity for us, and definitely is a citywide initiative, but I think that, as Keith said, like our district is really heavily populated with restaurants, multiple restaurants on multiple blocks, so we can really kind of take advantage of that and the desire to do these things and hopefully create positive change out there. You could go to the next slide. It's a funny one. Yeah, so this is just Commissioner Trottenberg, who is probably going to be spearheading a lot of this, agreeing that our district is an ideal
I love this
location
last book into the conversation they had.
to pilot it. So yeah, I don't know if Sandy has anything to add, because you were around when the Parklet program was being implemented too, and I think that it's a different time now, but there are certain challenges that definitely presented that we might want to consider when writing a resolution or guidance in any way.
Yeah, can we go to Sandy and then to John?
And I just want to follow up a little bit with what Claire mentioned. I think at the Transportation Committee, we passed a resolution that recommended a whole lot of streets. And I think we hoped they'd just close cross streets. There's very little traffic. It's a great time to do it because it's not going to hurt any of these. You just go to the next block. The traffic is so light. And I have personal experience with Kips Bay Neighborhood Alliance, or Alliance for Kips Bay, sorry. There's no cafe, there's no restaurant, so there's really no reason to go to this closed street. It's just a piece of pavement, and yes, it provides more room, but it's not really public space. And so I was really hoping the bids would come forward and actually recommend some streets. And apparently that's the way it's worked in some of the other communities around New York. So anyway, we'd love to hear some feedback. I think the Transportation Committee is really positive about taking over some of the streets. It's public space. It should be available for the public.
All right, John.
Yeah, hi. Could you, Brendan or Claire, could you go back to the slide right before this one?
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, this gets a little bit to Sandy's point. First of all, I don't want to stand in the way of this in any way, because obviously it could be very helpful to some restaurants I like a lot. I live at First Avenue and 55th Street, which is dead in the middle of that 49th to 64th. So I would just, assume that Keith's office and Ben's office, both, that sort of cuts through both of their districts, and are going to be very attentive to the details of how this is done. And also echoing a little bit, Sandra's point about the cross streets being an idea there. But I would support this, and also 2nd Avenue, 49th to 53rd, 55th to 58th. I just would want to know how that's being done. And if Keith and Ben are comfortable with that, it's going to be done in a way that leaves the, community, everything passable, then I'm with it. But I would be interested in the details. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this? So, I mean, I initially put some of the concerns that I had in that email to primers for this conversation. And Keith actually alluded to it earlier in the day too about picking winners and losers. And so my big fear about the logistics of this is with the street closures is I think there needs to be something comprehensive that shows a logic in their selection rather than just saying, okay, well, this just seems to work, because that at the end it does favor certain restaurants and retails compared to others. And so one of the initial feedback that I had was you know, at the end of the day, for example, looking at First and Second Avenue, there are a number of businesses throughout that corridor in different sections, and what's going to say one section should be picked over another and allow those businesses to be able to go into the street and others not to, because at the end of the day, we could just shut down all of Second Avenue, you know, with that logic of, you know, making sure that businesses had space in front of theirs. So that's just some concerns I have. I don't know how that technically would work. You can also hear from, you know, Brian after this presentation, who has some ideas that actually overlap with some of these specific streets.
Yeah, just I'm sorry, excuse me, Kyle. Excuse me.
Yeah, let me go to Sandra and then to you, John.
No, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
And I just want to say that there have been ideas that for instance, if a whole street is closed down, it could be used by the restaurant around the corner. And it could just be a place where you go and sit, more like a cafe situation. So I think there are lots of possibilities for how it could work, but I think there is some urgency, because as the traffic starts to increase again, if we don't establish these spaces, they won't stay. And, you know, it's like learning to walk again or whatever. If we don't put aside this space now, we're never going to have it. So I think, yes, there's lots of details to work out, but there really is, it's important that we say we want to do this and that we really want to close some streets. And maybe it's a lane of Second Avenue. I think Second Avenue is 7 lanes wide. It's incredible.
Do you have any, Sandra, just to follow up on that, because you also oversee bike lanes, obviously, and bus lanes and all that, what would the, you know, impact on those lanes be? And even if it was mixed, then what sort of public safety issues would there be?
Well, for instance, they had the pop-up, they used to have pop-up, they call them pop-up restaurants, where what they did was they took over the parking space. And so, for instance, on Second Avenue, there is a parking lane, but it is adjacent to the bike lane. But all we'd have to do is move the bus lane, which is on the west side of the street, move the bus lane one over and take the bus lane. And for instance, you know, restaurants on both sides could then use the west side of the street. That would be one solution.
Okay. Interesting. All right, let's go to John and then Yusuf.
Yeah, I mean, once again, just coming from living at 55th and First and having lived at 56th and Second for many years, it would be I can't imagine how you could completely close those sections of those streets. But you get into Keith's problem then if you decide, well, you're going to close, if you're going to close the east side of First Avenue, which, you know, cut off a couple lanes. There are lots of nice restaurants there that I know that will be helped by that. But there'll be restaurants on the other side of the street, on the west side of First Avenue, that won't be. So I just think there's a lot of thinking that has to go into this, because I can't imagine how you could completely close down those 15 blocks of First Avenue, especially with the lead up to the 59th Street Bridge traffic there. But I'll go with Keith and Ben on this. If you know, if they judge that, you know, something that makes sense, and from a public safety point of view it makes sense, and a practical point of view, I would support it. But I would just like to understand the details.
Yeah, and those are things that we can add into a potential resolution if we choose to favor this. But those are things that we can add into a resolution that says, you know, making mindful that it's fair, that public safety is observed, things of that nature. We can add those into any type of resolution, just to state that for the record. Yusuf?
Yeah, I would echo everything that was said, but I think offer a couple of suggestions. So, you know, the point on equity is a really, really good one. And Sandra's kind of recommendation around potentially sharing for restaurants is one tool, but I think in general, we probably need to push for two things. One of them is like, you know, data-driven or roughly data-driven justification. You know, you generally think that the avenues are sources of very high foot traffic, and in some cases, you know, as narrow kind of sidewalk space as you would get on side streets. There are also, you know, places with potentially a higher density of restaurants, so it depends by the avenue, of course. And so just kind of pushing for, like, you know, at the very least, right, give us a formula or like a set of different metrics that were used. That would be helpful. And then the second thing is providing, even in general terms, remedies or opportunities to partake in sort of the benefits for neighboring restaurants. So, you know, the sharing option is a good one. There might be other options. Maybe it makes delivery easier for the restaurants that are not included. Things like that, I think, would be important.
All right, thank you.
Kyle, you have another hand as well from Sean.
Sean, yep. Do we have the question listed out, or is he unmuted?
Sean, you are unmuted now. Sean?
Hey, Sean, are you there? We can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
You're coming in very
I can hear you
faintly.
faintly. Yeah.
Great, sorry about that.
Hey, Sean, we can't hear you anymore. Maybe, do you want to type your question into the question and answer or the chat box, and we can read it out loud, because I can't hear you. No worries.
In the meantime, Jeannie has her hand, Kyle.
Yep, let's go to Jeannie.
Okay, just a thought, just a question to Claire and Sandra. Instead of like restaurants trying to figure out their space on a given block or street, you know, the complexities, you know, we do talk about hygiene, tables, you know, all these new laws that'll have to go in place. Would it be, you thought about maybe like just setting up certain, like almost like pop-up space that can be shared? So no restaurant can actually own one, you know, one piece, right? So there's one block, there's like two areas, and everybody gets a chance to use it over time.
That people would cycle out.
Spill into the street, and then they can come back and somebody else can share it. So we're not worried about regulating every you know, piece of land or every, you know, space for every restaurant. And it might be more fair for others to get into a space, because some might not even be able to afford it anyway, you know, to set up an outside space.
If I could respond, I think that's, they're open to all kinds of ideas, but that would work well if it was a cross street and the whole street was closed, for instance. You could then, you know, open up or take as much as, maybe it's based on how large a restaurant is. Second Avenue, where they actually identified, it's one restaurant right after the other. It's a continuous, I don't think there's anything but restaurants. So it's a slightly different condition, and it does lend itself fairly well to using the space directly in front of the restaurant. So, I mean, maybe it has to be 2 lanes of Second Avenue, which is not impossible, especially right now. The traffic level is not bad. Yeah, I mean, the point is it really does vary depending on the situation. And as Yusuf said, there may be a way to make it a little more equitable based on how we see restaurants. But I think that idea of maybe sharing every, you get 2 days out of the week and you rotate through, that's also eminently possible. It's certainly a viable idea. Claire, did you want to?
Thank you.
All right.
No.
So I just want to thank Rob, who just jumped off. His information is in the comments as well, and he supported the presentation that will come after this. But I would like to keep moving. Let me see. Did Sean put his question in? Oh, hello.
I think Claire was going to say something.
Oh, go ahead, Claire.
We can keep moving.
Oh, okay.
Thank
So
you.
Sean had a question that says, in order to facilitate this as quickly as Sandra describes, what are the next steps that we are working on as soon as possible? So what would we need, Sandra, to go forth with this open streets plan? Would it be for example, a joint resolution? Is there a process that you guys already have for open streets that would be good for us to know about?
We already have a resolution which actually passed full board, so you probably all are familiar with it to some degree. But what we'd like to do is to support the bill that passed today. And then also, I think they're really looking for the community board to recommend some of these streets. And that involves a little bit of community outreach, but also a little bit of research on our part. I'm familiar with the upper part of our district because there are some streets where it's almost every use is a restaurant. There's really nothing else. But I think they're looking for a list from us or some recommendations and for us to put together any of the concerns that we have. So it probably is a joint resolution. Our meeting is next Monday. So if if the committee wanted to put together their concerns, they could be presented at our meeting on Monday.
So when would this Excel sheet of streets be needed by? When is there a due date for that?
Monday.
Oh, Monday.
I think that's June 1st. I'm not sure June 1st or June 2nd. I mean, it's important that we move quickly because traffic is coming back, and unless we set these patterns now, it's going to be difficult to retroactively do.
Yeah, Sean made a good comment where he said he lives near Irving Place. And those obviously have a lot of restaurants. It's very quiet. It's probably, I actually walk in the middle of the street there when I'm down there already. So it's kind of a, interesting idea. But I also know at the same time that we would get a lot of pushback from some of the associations around there, particularly around Gramercy. So if we do list potential sites, is the city going to do some sort of, or we could do this ourselves if they're not doing it, but some sort of town halls to get input from the community? Or is it just kind of like we're in desperation mode that we're kind of bypassing those certain conversations?
And I know Keith Power's office recommended that we do a town hall. So I think we come up with these recommendations and they're just recommendations at this point, and that we definitely need community support because if we recommend it and people don't want it, it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So I think a good next step would be for us to come up with ideas for literal streets that we can share with the transportation committee on Monday. So I'll send a follow-up email after this. If you can all email me by Sunday with your ideas, your thoughts, and I can share that, or if you all want to attend as well, can attend the meeting on Monday and we can share that back and add it to the suggestions. And then, and we already had this conversation, but Claire, Sandra, and I can talk about holding a joint town hall, and have the electeds come there and speak about what they're thinking about and allow the community to have their input in there as well, because I think that's crucial. Obviously, not only to getting the street closures, but also to the success of the businesses who would use those street closures. So I want to make sure that the community has input on that.
And bring into the discussion groups like the Sutton Area Community Association and IRFA and all these whatever.
Well, yeah, and Gramercy, all that stuff
all
too.
these could be,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Because honestly, the secret, yeah. Yep.
Kyle,
Who's
should
speaking?
we include the, sorry, this is Seema. Quick
Oh,
question,
yeah.
should we include all of the kind of equity concerns that we have, or should we decouple street closures and then the equity stuff? I know Yusuf asked that, I didn't quite.
Yeah, so I think that should be separate. I think just for now, we just pick the streets that we personally know of, or if we have other data, we can suggest that as well, and just put that into a list. And when we work on that joint resolution together, I think that's when we input things on equity and making sure that the process, or even bring it up at the town hall. Because I think it's better to take it step by step. So right now, just suggestions that we're thinking of, and we already actually got surveyed by the city for it. I don't know if you saw that email. I think they sent an email to everybody about, suggest the street closure if you know of one, can you send it there? So we have all of that already in the works. So I think once we get to the next step, which is then reviewing all of that, and then we can talk about things like equity and putting that in a potential joint resolution. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Does that answer your question, Seema?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right, so are there any other questions on this? Because I do want to get to Brian's presentation, which is very valuable because he is a local business owner and he is in one of these corridors that was mentioned. Again, he owns Crave and also Taco Vision, which are right on the 50th, 51st Street corridor on 2nd Avenue. And he's been ingrained in the community for a very long time. And, I'll let him talk all about it because he's been waiting patiently. And I think you're actually at Crave right now, right? Or your office?
I'm in the office, looking at my surveillance cameras and seeing, people walking by, and it feels like very quiet in here. Usually there's a lot of people knocking on the door and they want me to, take their end of the night receipts and, start wrapping down the night. So it's kind of funny being here by myself, in the restaurant with nobody here. But first, I'd like to thank Kyle, for the introduction and Community Board 6. I appreciate giving me the opportunity to speak. Normally, it's in person, and it's funny, actually being a panelist this evening. So it's not as a nervous feeling going in front of the Community Board for once. So this is kind of fun.
We don't bite, man. We don't bite.
But it's a really there's been some real highs and lows and since it started, and we've usually as an industry we're kind of fragmented. We talk to neighbors on each side, but not necessarily the neighbors a couple avenues away, and the industry as a whole, even though we have representation at the New York Restaurant Association and then locally with the Hospitality Alliance, this has caused us to come together to really try and figure out how we could save our businesses, our industry, and the neighborhoods that are a shell of what they were. So just to give a little background, this was something that I've always wanted to create this, block alliance, because 50th Street between, on 2nd Avenue between 50th and 51st is 100% restaurants on the west side. We're all 20 by 100. That leads to kind of these small, restaurants that bring some, good energy, and everyone is bringing a different cuisine or a different angle. So, I've always encouraged and loved the more concepts, the better operators, the better for everybody. So we always welcomed, new restaurants, and I think that the one positive thing, and I'm always trying to be positive in a time like this, is that this has led us to unite and create the Restaurant Row East Alliance so that we have a voice. And, so on our side, we have, 10 restaurants that have joined our alliance. And then we have 3 restaurants out of 4 retail spaces across the street that are also on board. So we have, 13 out of 14 spaces on our block are all eating and drinking establishments. And I would say that that's probably the highest density of restaurants and bars on any block that I've surveyed since starting this and walking around and counting, because unfortunately we look at the amount of vacancies that have nothing to do with COVID, but have to do with just the high rents, the Amazon effect, and just doing business as a whole in New York City has just gotten a lot more difficult throughout the years. So luckily our block is still very vibrant. We have one restaurant that's not occupied, but I don't think that's because of any other reason other than a landlord just not looking to get a deal done, which is very common. So I think we've been really fortunate before this to have a great block and a place where, the UN and the Turtle Bay and the Sutton Place and the office workers and the hotel guests know that they could walk down to 2nd Avenue and kind of get a piece of real neighborhood restaurants. A little bit of history of how this started. Since the pandemic hit, Ken McCoy from Farmhouse Hospitality and I have been speaking every single day about how we're going to save our restaurants and save our block and neighborhood. And we realized that there's more strength in numbers, and that's how we started that. So I started in the area with a small little ceviche restaurant. So we were the first all ceviche restaurant. It was called Crave Ceviche Bar. And at that time, I took over a check cashing store. There was a little tiny, 650 square foot space at the time. That's all I could afford to rent. And we literally removed bulletproof glass. And, to think that at one point we had check cashing stores on this same block, and, we converted it into a restaurant that really, took off and added some excitement to the neighborhood and changed the landscape of the block. And then for those who remember, on March 15th, 2008, the tragic crane accident happened, and that crushed our restaurant and closed our business. So 12 years later, when this is all happening and we're watching our sales decline and we're seeing, we're not even sure what our future holds, that's when the mayor came on 12 years to the date to tell us that we would no longer be able to keep the restaurants open. So, we've seen adversity in our area, nothing like this. But I do think that if I look back at 2008, it had a huge effect on the real estate, especially retail, for a year or two after. But we really bounced back. And I think we're, before this, we were in a great place. But the area is very special to us. And, between Ken and myself, we've been here for, 13 years each. Ken owns 2 blocks in the buildings, two restaurants on buildings on the block. And I also own the building where Crave Fish Bar is. And then most recently, when I opened up Taco Vision, I kind of doubled down on the neighborhood, and I purchased that building, and I put a fast casual taqueria on the 2nd floor, a full service restaurant. Kyle, if you want to go to the next slide. So it's basically, this is pretty much what I said already, that our block is probably the highest density of eating and drinking establishments in Community Board 6. Next slide. So the consequences, about half of the restaurants and bars on our block are not open, and the other half are doing, take on delivery. And as others mentioned earlier, it's not really take on delivery, doesn't really help you pay the bills. So, are you able to pay your rents? Are you able to pay, all these bills that you had beforehand? Absolutely not. So, right now we're looking at, probably with phase 3 rolling in. And if that happens, according to the guideline, we're looking at realistically the earliest at July 15th opening on phase 3. And that's probably going to turn into probably August 1st. So we're looking at 5 or 6 months of not, really able to pay our rent, on top of when you close, and I never thought about this because usually if you're closing a business, you forecast, okay, I'm closing, it's not looking good. Okay, it's time to wind down the business. We just close one day, and then we have credit terms with vendors that goes anywhere from 7 days to 30 days. So if you poll, restaurants, and you ask them what they look like to reopen, it's a big financial undertaking to even reopen the doors, because you need to pay back your vendors. And, being a good operator and having good terms, you can have it, easily, if you just stopped your business one day, $100,000 worth of vendor bills on top of the sales tax, on top of the accruing rent and everything else. So it's a big financial decisions for places to reopen. And once you open, you have to give it your best effort to stay open and keep the wheels moving. So for us, we've looked at this as a way to get us to the point of welcoming phase 3 opening, not knowing what the mandates are, whether it's 25%, whether it's 50%. We're all waiting. We look at other states, and we've studied every state and what they're doing. So we've even taken some measures and already did installations just to get ahead of it. So if we need to install plexiglass, the entire inventory of plexiglass in New York City doesn't get taken up on the week before we're told we need to install plexiglass. So, we're sitting on the sidelines waiting, and reading every article and watch what's going on. But if we were able to, and Kyle, if you can go to the next slide. If we were able to phase in the model of seating outside, then we believe, and the studies have shown, that people will be comfortable to sit outside, practice social distancing, and reintroduce themselves to going back to their favorite restaurant, and sitting down. And then when this phase 3 rolls in, and we're going to be severely limited at the 25 to 50%, then at least they went to a restaurant like ours and said, okay, I see what they're doing. I understand. And they maybe told us about, how they're going to open back up, and they'll be more comfortable re-entering a restaurant when it's safe and when we're able to do so. So if you can go to the next slide. So the idea is that we want to, take our extensive experience in food and beverage, and dealing with the challenges of operating a restaurant in New York City and dealing with multiple city agencies, on top of the demands of, our customers and promoting safety. And we would like to, and we understand that it's not a one size fits all. And that's why we can only do our best as the Restaurant Row East Alliance is to represent our block because of the high density restaurants that our block brings to the neighborhood. So we would like to propose shutting down and creating a Stone Street model for 50th Street for both sides of the avenue. And this would be something that, based on what Keith has recommended, something that would close when the social distancing ends, or if it's that October 31st date that he mentioned earlier on the call. But basically, we can't use the inside of our restaurants. That's how we generate money. So if we could bring the inside of our restaurant outside, and we could do it safely, and we could do it following the social distancing and requiring masks and doing this in a fair and equitable way, I think that this would help places reopen that are not open. And a table outside, I think we could, put measures into place where we don't have the Upper East Side issue of the overcrowding, because there would be something like ideas have been reservations only, and there's time slots where you get those seats. So no walk-ups, you can't walk up and sit down, but you make a reservation, you have this 4-top table for X amount of time. There's also ways to use technology. And there's a company, for example, and I have nothing to do with them, but I've spoken to every new company that's offering these contactless solutions, is you could sit down, there's a QR code on the table, and you could literally order your food and your drink, you pay for it, and the food comes out from a food runner. And there's that's the experience. And you want to order another drink or more food, you could do it right from your phone without having to have any contact with any touch points. So if you can go to the next slide, Kyle. So just listing a bunch of the ideas that we have, and restaurants would enforce these, and there would be a list that we would work and seek your guidance, and the Department of Health and the Department of Consumer Affairs, which is what restaurants are doing right now. Employees getting temperature checks, wellness checks, and different safety measures just to open up your doors. So and the hours would look to be capitalized off of the lunch business, which we're afraid that there's not even that much lunch business to be had, because the offices are not really back in the area. And we also understand the quality of life issues that are concerns of our residents and our co-op boards, and everyone who lives in this area. So, I think that the responsibility would be on us to deal with the sanitation, and that would be something that our group, if we were allowed to do this, would work closely with Community Board 6 to tackle these issues. So we're looking at 13 restaurants that really need help, and waiting until phase 3 is just, I think, kind of putting a nail in the coffin. And every week that goes by, it's harder and harder to get back open, and the debt is just accruing. So I worked with an architect to create a couple different scenarios for our street. And Kyle, if you can go to the next. And these are, 3 different designs. One is the first one I mentioned, which is a Stone Street, shutting down the entire block. And that's the scenario on the left. The option in the middle would keep 2 lanes open. And then the option on the right would have 2 lanes on each side and 3 lanes open in the middle for traffic. And the way we devised this, and if you can go to the next slide. And this is just an aerial view of our block, and I'm right there in the basement, temporarily closed Crayfish Bar. If you can go to the next. The seating plan that we put together takes into account all social distancing, using screens and plexi to separate you. So as we just look at the next couple of slides, you can see that what we're proposing, we have safe social distancing for every single 3 scenarios. If you go to the next slide, Kyle. So we realize that the avenue is not level. So there's ways to easily put down these modular wood platforms. And the idea behind this is to make this inexpensive for the restaurants, something that we could do quickly. And the idea is also, if we have to, if the process can't be streamlined and it's going to, take a long time, we know the window of opportunity for our summer season and outdoor dining, we will lose this opportunity. Kyle, if you go to the next one. So this is an example of the first option, and this would be the most seating configuration. So if you take, there's a wine bar on our block called Somtime, and that is another 20-foot wide space, like we all are on the west side of the block, and this shows what the seating capacity could be. And then this is this is the same option one with the full pedestrian seating. This is option two. So you see it decreases, that 20-foot storefront, by probably about maybe 20%. And then the next slide, Kyle. So you can see the bike lane is still there, and whether that needs to be, that would need to be separated with whether it's concrete or something for safety. But that's I think for other people on the board to advise us. And then if you can go on to the next slide. And then this is the third option where we have 2 lanes on each side, and we have the 3 lanes in the middle. So we're looking at another, 16 to 20 seats per 20-foot restaurant, which, if the demand is there, which we expect it to be, and we could say that every 4-person table has, maybe is able to spend $100, we could probably turn that table outside in those hours that we're open 5 or 6 times, where a normal restaurant, if you're, able to turn your tables 2.5, 3 times, you're crushing it. But outside, there's different economics, because we all wait all year to sit outside and get out of apartments, let alone, a pandemic, and everyone really just waiting. So I think besides, the value to our restaurants, whether it's reopening, hiring back people, and creating this bridge of introducing people back into our restaurants in a limited capacity, I think for the mental well-being of people who have been stuck in their apartments for so long and who didn't leave the city, this would be I think a welcome addition to our customers and the public. If you know the next. Okay, I think Kyle, that's it.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian. That was actually really amazing. And I think what's great about that is that you've thought about the community, you've thought about how this can work practically, and you've given different options about what could work for you and the rest of the businesses on that block. And I think, as you probably heard from the conversation we had with Sandra and Claire, is that I think once we start identifying these areas within our district that would be amenable to closing down streets, I think we could actually probably use, depending on the situation, one of each of those, you know, depending on which situation it is, to have something that's partial, to have something that's completely closed down, to have something that's, you know, a mix of that. And I think that's pretty great. And I think what's really helpful is for you, the way you broke down economically how this is impacting you right now, but also what this would mean to you. And which was part of our earlier conversation. I don't think there's any one be all solution that's going to make everything go away. But I think this is an idea that provides you with the support that you need and other business owners like yourselves. And I think this could actually work with retail and restaurants. So depending on the makeup of the block, you have certain situations, certain sections that are, you know, dining areas, certain places where people can pick up some things or whatever it might be and be on their way. And I really like the idea of reservations, because I think that's the big concern for a lot of people is, isn't this actually antithesis to what we're hearing about congregating? When we hear about, you know, restrictions for no one should be gathering more than 50 people or more than 10 people in certain spaces, doesn't this actually just create that exact same problem? And I think when you have shown the thought process of organizing it into reservations and having time limits so that there's actual crowd control, and the fact that you won't have people waiting in line down the block like you have for grocery stores right now, actually. But people who are at home and then say, oh, you know, I have my reservations in 10 minutes. And now I'm going to leave my house to go, you know, support the local business and get my food and whatever it is. And then in an hour, I'll be gone. So I think that's very well thought out. And I think with the conversations that transportation's have, and definitely if we have that town hall together, I would love for you to be a part of that as well, because I think this is a great example of what I always describe as like for us, by us. I think, you know, we've had this conversation about street fairs and about making everything really local again. And I think this is a great example of for us, by us, which is a local business owner has come up with an idea to help the local businesses. And I think that's always a great first step, is the people who are impacted by it are coming up with the ideas for it. And then we can complement that process in any way that we can. So are there any other questions for Brian on this? That was a pretty good presentation. I think Sandra's the question probably.
And I'll try and be brief because I know it's late. I had two questions. One, what do you think about going around the corner? You know, because the avenue, I'd love to close the avenue, but I'm not sure DOT would ever do that. What about using adjacent side streets and having, you know, the two restaurants on either end, potentially using the space around the corner? Is that a viable business option?
Yeah, I think that, you know, how do you make it fair and equitable for everyone? And I think that that's been like keeping me up at night and trying to figure out, you know, is it the restaurant down the block, is it his fault that half of his block is not restaurants? Is it, you know, is it fair that maybe, you know, one big box store is out of business? Well, maybe in that scenario, it would help because they get to encroach on that property that's not being used. But if I look at both sides of 50th and 51st, you know, we have a construction 17-story building going up. They're occupying one lane. On 51st, you already have a whole nother restaurant row on the side block, kind of like where I am on 53rd between 2nd and 3rd. I mean, that's, you know, that's a wild block, and that's a whole, you know, another conversation for a side block, but that's also off the FDR, exit. So I think that we're not worried about the logistics of how we would get the food that far. We're not worried because it's all about delivery now. And I think that, you know, there's ways to, if we're bringing the food to you around the block, I like that much better than a courier thrown in the back of his bike, riding around like a madman, and then dropping it off in your building and it comes upside down. So I'm not worried about having to go further. I am then worried about those restaurants in that side block. There's so many of them and they're up and down that how do we all get a piece of this block? And I know it was mentioned earlier, I think maybe you mentioned it, about maybe 1 week it's these restaurants, another week it's other restaurants.
Yeah.
But I don't know if these side streets have the capacity based on our block and how high density restaurants. I mean, we're 93% restaurants on just our one block that are in business. So I think it's tough because then we're all competing for that.
And just as we start to try and think of ways to use the space, it's great to hear your point of view. I know one thing that came up a lot at our executive committee was restrooms. Like what would be the strategy that would be utilized?
Yeah, so I just read they just reopened restaurants in Chicago. So I was up last night late and I was reading Eater and what they just did, and I think that they were allowing, and I forget because it's just too much. It's like overload of what we're reading from other states. It's either 3 or 6 people, and they have to be 6 feet apart. In my mind, and it's based on how many people are actually eating and drinking, right? Because it's really just a numbers game. If you only have 10 seats, you can only go to the bathroom so many times in an hour that you're sitting down. But if we have more seats, so I think that we would have to limit a certain amount of people to use the restrooms, and they would have to be cleaned by our team after every use. And of course, we're implementing different measures in the bathrooms where you don't have to touch anything.
But so basically, you don't see it as a problem. You don't think it's something that definitely can be worked out, because it seems like you have a strategy for how to do it.
I would say if we can figure out a way to take our dining rooms and put them out on the street, I think we could find a safe way to let people into our restaurants to use the bathroom, because pretty soon, at least in phase 3, so maybe it's not as soon as something like this, they will be allowed to come and use the bathroom. So.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Any other questions for Brian about the plan, or maybe even his perspective? All right, seeing none. Brian, thanks again for presenting to us and representing, that whole corridor. And obviously, you're going to remain engaged in conversations with us, and we'll pull you into all those meetings. I think you're a great representative for this plan and also for the businesses that are being impacted. So thank you once again.
I love our neighborhood. It's sad to see what it is right now. I hope people come back, and I want to give them a reason to be happy to come back. So, we eagerly await reopening, and we just really hope that the places that are around reopen also.
No, thank you so much. And, it's because of people like you that we will be able to get back to where we were. So thank you for your leadership on that.
I'll leave my email address. If anyone wants to ask me anything, I'm going to put my email address down here.
I just asked if I can come past and ask more questions, because I think it's really valuable to have this information. So thank you.
My pleasure. I make myself available anytime.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, so moving on to the next part of the agenda, I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. We had Senator Hoylman's representative speak to us earlier because we had to switch around the agenda. Are there any thoughts on the bill that Senator Hoylman has put out? I'm inclined to support it. I think Senator Hoylman has thought it out pretty well. He's put a lot of restrictions on it. And Cody or Brendan, could you put up the bill again? Just very quickly, just to refresh people's mind.
I'll do that right
now. Thank you. So just as a refresher, this is the liquor to go bill to ensure that for 2 years after, people can continue to do this option. And as Sam mentioned, this doesn't change any of the open container laws. This just allows people to purchase and then take home. So this is very similar for anyone who knows how some of the craft beer places work, things like growlers, where you can go up and fill up like a gallon thing of beer, of craft beer, and then you can take it home. This is very similar to that. It's working out right now. Just in my personal experience, I've seen people enjoy the option. I've seen people purchase the option, which has helped bring some income into the local restaurants and bars. And I think it's pretty well thought out, and he's put in a lot of provisions to ensure that it's safe, it's respectful, that it's regulated, and I think it's a pretty smart bill that I'd like to personally support. Are there any thoughts on it? For or against? Because I think one of the things that we've learned from today is that there is no magic solution to all of this, and a lot of the recovery is going to be little things that come together to help people get back to where they were or to help be afloat. And so this is, in my view, one of the small things that can allow for some extra income that's still being done right now and working pretty successfully. I was actually talking to a couple of cops on the street the other day and asking them if they've seen actually any increase in crime or increase in disorderly conduct or anything of that nature in regards to this, alcohol to go. And they said they hadn't seen it. And of course, these are, just one subset of the force. But I thought that was pretty interesting. In the area that we live in, there are a lot of bars and a lot of restaurants, and I would assume that there'd be one idiot at least who would do something to ruin it for everyone. But so far, it's been pretty safe and sound. But does anyone have any questions or comments on it? Would anyone like to make a motion of support of this piece of legislation?
Motion to support.
Second.
All right. So the motion was from Anton, and who seconded it? Sorry,
Susan.
was that
Susan.
Susan? All right. So Cody, you want to do the roll call again?
Sure. So you're first, Kyle?
Yep, I'm in favor.
Okay. Matt did not rejoin, right? So, Dan didn't join. Jeannie?
In favor?
Paige? Paige?
Hello.
Hi, Paige.
There's a lot of problems with this. You keep on having it unmuted and you never hear me.
Are you in
And I
favor?
tried to ask 2 questions and I never got through.
Paige, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Your vote on this proposal, Paige?
I said favor. This is my 4th time.
All right, thank you. Youssef?
I'm abstaining for cause.
Okay. John left. Anton?
Support.
Kevin? Kevin, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm still reviewing. Can you circle back to me, please?
Sure. Frank's not here. Seema?
I'm in favor.
Susan?
In favor.
All right, we just need Kevin's vote right now. We've got 6 in favor, 1 abstain for cause.
Did you go back to Kevin? Sorry, I don't know if I missed that.
Not yet.
In favor.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay,
because I
so
also want to
that's-
remind people that at the last part is that it requires the SLA to regularly consult the community, so there would still be public comment about the effects of the new policy. All right. So did that pass, Cody?
Yes,
All right.
7001.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be quick with my chair's report. So the big thing that I've been working on personally is I've been collaborating with Community Board 8. We heard a little bit about it earlier from the bids. So they put out a survey for the businesses about how to reopen. Basically going, if anyone saw the link that I put to Reopening New York, the governor's directions on that, is basically going through that manual and helping people understand how what is going to be required of them, that type of stuff, what are the rules and regulations. So they were putting on, they put out a survey, they are starting some workshops on that, and I thought instead of creating something completely from scratch again, I think it's inefficient to duplicate efforts, so we partnered up with them and said, because a lot of the corridor is shared anyway. A lot of the district is overlapping. A lot of us are in and out of each district, so it makes a lot of sense for us to collaborate on it. So as I mentioned, the first workshop is next Thursday. I'll send out an email from that, and Cody and the rest of the staff will send out reminders about it as well. But there's going to be a series of different workshops to help businesses with the rules and regulations. I think it's a good idea. I think on one hand, the primary focus for a lot of businesses is, are we even going to be open to follow rules and regulations? But I think there are a lot of businesses that are or planning to and need that information and guidance because it is overwhelming as we've seen. So we're going to be working with them on that. So we are their partners in that. And I attend a weekly meeting with Community Board 8 to provide input and to collaborate in making sure that the workshops are representative and comprehensive and have the proper speakers for that. So I've been working with them on that. The other thing is, I don't know if we want to do this. I'm totally open to the idea if we want to put together our own surveys of small businesses and consumer confidence, basically. My inclination is that there's a lot of that being done from the bids and from the small business services anyway, that we can just tap into that data, that it would seem, redundant for us to create our own thing just for the sake of calling it our own. But if that's something that people are interested in, reach out. There's no, obviously, time sensitivity to that. We can also obviously get information from CB8 and from the other agencies that are conducting surveys. But I'm not inclined to be redundant, so I think that's fine. And then again, as Youssef and Jeannie shared, the governor has put out guidances on how to reopen. So I would just, maintain that observance just to see, in your personal experiences, how it's working out. Are people complying with it? Does it seem practical? If there are anything that pops out to you, please do bring it back to the committee. And then lastly, Cody, you're going to have to remind me of the names, but we received some complaints about a couple of establishments that did not seem to be following guidances. Or maybe one of the attendees could bring it up, or Cody, if you have them at hand.
Yes, 1 second.
Yeah.
This came to us from Carol Schachter, who is here. I'll allow Carol to raise these issues. Carol? Mm-hmm. Hello, Carol? Carol, are you there?
Maybe you should just run through the establishments and just give some bullet points
Sure.
to the complaints.
All right. She sent in an email with some questions about some establishments on 3rd Avenue. I don't know if anyone lives near these establishments and could shed some light on what's going on at 194 3rd Avenue. That's Remorca. Triona's on 3rd, 192 3rd Avenue, and the Loop at 173 3rd Avenue. It looks like just Carol was concerned with those establishments not, complying with all the regulations or being open or whatnot.
Does anyone have any
If
comments
anyone
on that?
lives near there or has seen anything, but I could send this in an email to you all. I've just, it's harder for normally when residents send in concerns like this, I can go and look or show up. I can't do that right now.
Yeah, and on our end, Cody and I have received a couple of complaints from other establishments, particularly earlier during quarantine, where some businesses appeared not to be to following guidelines, and so we followed up with proper authorities, whether it was SLA or DCA or even the local police precincts, because individuals were calling up about it because apparently they seem to be very open about it. So if I just ask that the rest of the committee just be vigilant. If anyone is hearing any rumors or if you're seeing anything in your own personal experience, please bring that back to the committee and email Cody and myself so that we can take proper action on that and get the proper authorities to review what's actually going on. Because we want to make sure that everyone's safe, that, you know, it doesn't get ruined for the rest of the small businesses in the neighborhood, that we can reopen properly, that we can be successful, that we can try out these ideas. And then just to end, I just want to thank everyone for
Sorry,
slogging through all
Kyle.
of this. Oh, go ahead.
Kyle, could I just quickly ask Cody, what are the things that she was reporting that were problems?
Just activity. I can send them to you.
Yeah, just curious. Thank you. You can send it to me.
Offline, workers moving in and out, not wearing masks, or deliveries coming in and out, suggesting that establishments might be open when they're not supposed to be, things like that.
Cody,
Thank you.
Cody,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me. Carol Schachter was the boss's chair for about 15 years.
Yes, she was here in my tenure as well.
Yeah, so I mean, she, you know, I think she's very vigilant on things like this, and she should be taken seriously.
Yeah, so we're following up on that as well, but I just wanted to use that as an example to, you know, have everyone be vigilant as well, and we'll follow up on that and make sure that everyone's complying with proper guidelines. So just to conclude, I know this meeting went late. I'm very sorry about it, but I think what this demonstrates is that there's a lot going on, and it's going very, very quickly. As we saw, we had this on the agenda, and the bill just got introduced a couple of hours before the meeting. Luckily, we had one of the sponsors, Councilmember Powers, to explain his thoughts on it and to answer some questions. But I just want to thank all of you, not only for sticking through this meeting, but for all of the work that you're continuing to do as we move forward in the year and through this pandemic. A lot of responsibility and a lot of guidance is going to be coming from our committee as Business Affairs and Street Activities. It's combining all of those ideas together. So, you know, I appreciate all of your hard work, your dedication, your care for the local community, and all of the ideas that you have. I encourage you to come up with interesting ideas, to think outside of the box, and to bring them back to the group. I think this is the time, you know, we've all had ideas about what we want our neighborhoods to look like, or things to make, you know, businesses more successful, or to make pedestrian space more usable. And I think this is an interesting time to think about those ideas, because in previous times there were a lot of regulations and red tape to go through, and a lot of that is non-existent anymore because times are changing and the way the world works is changing. So if we have ideas about what we want this neighborhood to look like, of how we can support small businesses and the workers who are employed by them, and how we want our space to look like, I mean, this is a perfect time to do that. And so today was a jam-packed day just because everything ended up falling on today with all of the bills. So I just wanted to make sure that we're addressing this sooner rather than later, because, you know, my motto, it's like, I don't like being reactive. I like being proactive. And so, so we have a lot of information to sit on. We have the bill on the economic recovery and relief that we are in support of. So I'll follow up on that resolution. And we have a resolution on the liquor to go bill as well from Senator Hoylman, so I'll follow up on that. If one of the newer members would like to, you know, work on a resolution, that's a pretty simple one that I can help out with, but I suggest someone doing that, because I'd love to get more people involved in the resolution writing process. So if you're interested, please reach out to me, or I'll just reach out to people and say, I think this is a good idea for you. But thank you again for everyone. Sorry for keeping you up late, and appreciate all the work. And thanks again to Brian for a partnership, and Claire and Sandra and the rest of the Transportation Committee for their partnership. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night and stay well.
Kyle, thanks for putting together such a fantastic meeting. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I'm adjourning the
Kyle.
meeting
Bye.
at 9:05 for the record.
Do we have to take roll call or no?
Cody, do we have to take another roll call? That's for full board.
No, only full
Okay.
board has a second roll.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Stay healthy.
Good
Take care,
everybody.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.